You are watching Redbuddies podcast. What is this?
Episode 10?
10? Episode 10, I think.
It feels like episode 10, yeah.
It's been a long time.
We've hit double digits.
2.5 months. We were just talking about that earlier. Like, I didn't actually register before you said anything, but we've been doing this for 2.5 months.
You said 2 months, and I was like, it doesn't feel like 2 months. 2.5 months.
It really doesn't. It feels like this is like our third or fourth week doing this or something.
Exactly.
But yeah, anyways, welcome to the podcast. I'm Urshid Vora. I'm joined by co-host Zubair Hamza, and today we have a very special guest, Danyal Khan.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure having you, and this is like a change of pace a little bit because you're one of our first guests that knows something about things.
Yeah.
we haven't, so far we've only had basically our friends. Omer kind of knew things.
Yeah.
Omer knew things, but all of our other guests are just basically our friends, and we have them on, and it's just we're just talking about things, and we're we don't know anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's some value to that for sure.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's we don't claim to know anything, and we just have fun conversation.
The most important thing is that you're having fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And these are a lot of fun. But yeah, Donna, you were telling us earlier that you graduated from St. Peter's University. That's where you got your undergrad in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And you got your master's from Rutgers in social work.
Yeah.
And also I know, you've done a lot of work for ICNA Relief.
Yeah.
And just recently, actually, the way we got in touch was there was a Suicide Awareness Week post that you made. And I replied to it, and then you replied to my response to it. And then we kind of got in touch. But yeah, so ICNA Relief and Suicide Awareness Week, there was a pretty good response to that, right?
Yeah, so the Suicide Awareness Week thing that we did was very last minute. So I'm in charge of Muslim Family Services, one of the departments of ICNA Relief. I'm in charge of it nationally. Mm-hmm. And it's the youngest department. There's a few services that fall under it, one of it being counseling, right? So I like to focus on back-end stuff. I like to focus on efficiency, procedures, protocol, right? But then there's the community side of it, which is webinars, campaigns, right, events. Mm-hmm. So one of my staff members reached out to me, and he informed me that it's going to be Suicide Awareness Week soon. We should do something. We're one of the leading organizations that provide this kind of service to the community. We should, it's a good opportunity to raise awareness of our services, because what makes ICNA Relief different than other organizations is that we don't charge for any of our services. There isn't a sliding scale fee or anything like that. So if a client's eligible for counseling services, they don't pay a dime, which is unheard of for the most part, right? Exactly. There are exceptions there, but and it's not even you're not paying, so you're probably getting bad service, right? No, right. We have a standard licensed professionals, licensed practitioners, so it's you're getting quality service. Right. So I reached out. I had that conversation with my coworker, and we decided to go for a campaign. Suicide, the topic itself is very personal to me. So I was let's actually see how much we can go about it. So we decided to create a post and a small little hashtag campaign, which is all you have to do is just take a picture of yourself, writing a post on any piece of paper, just saying hashtag you matter, hashtag ICNA Relief, hashtag Suicide Awareness Month, right? But then I realized, I'm going to add an extra push. So I created a video just recording myself. I'm not really confident when it comes to speaking in front of a camera. So I was just let me just see how it goes. So I didn't expect anything. I didn't expect much of it. Right. But subhanAllah, out of nowhere, all my friends and people who I don't know, I didn't even know YouTube before. Right. So it just got shared around. And next thing I know, people are doing, people were giving their thoughts on it, which was amazing. Right. Because in the video, I think I mentioned that even if we can help one person, then that's a win. And subhanAllah, as a response to that, so many people reached out to ICNA Relief and me privately about their battles with suicide, or their friends struggling with it, or their experiences with it, and just genuine appreciation, and also just curious on how can we address it, right? So more than I think 2 of our counseling offices saw an influx of suicidal clients, New Jersey included. After that, yeah, and there were a lot of people who were what was the point of this, right? It was just a post, but this exactly was it, right? And I think also Arshad, you posted on your story about know, how this is important, stuff like that. But at the same time, it's like we shouldn't generalize it. We should try to make it more personal, right? And then I responded to Arshad saying that, you know, like, you're doing exactly that, right? Like, when I made that video, like, I didn't like see myself as like some public speaker or anything. I just saw myself as someone who has a group of friends that he knows, right? Who's an individual, part of a community of New Jersey, right? Who is just going to make this video, and hopefully, if one of my friends is struggling, right, that I'm not aware of, that they benefit from it, right? And if they share it, and if they're, you know, just kind of like grow it and grow and grow it. And that's exactly what happened, right? So it wasn't like an amazing thing, but it definitely helped people, which was like the goal of it. Sure. So I would count it as a success for sure.
For sure. And it was the first time, I mean, like a bunch of our friends too, I would say, made posts. It was the first time I had seen such widespread amongst the Muslim community.
Exactly, yeah.
Like
I don't usually, like, my friends and I, we don't usually post stuff, right? But like, I saw it on our mutuals, like this like video trend going around, and like it's most of the time it's just people saying like, oh, here's like the latest like basketball score, like here's the newest video game, or here's something I ate for lunch. But like, this is the first time you really saw like a unified community effort. Yeah. Also something really close to home, like it was our friends, not some random people, like people we knew making personalized videos. I think that was like really powerful.
And that was basically the essence of it, was people you knew, like familiar faces, like we talked about, making these videos, which was like really, really impactful. Yeah. And so when I posted it, people responded. Nobody reached out in the sense of like, hey, I'm going through this problem. Could you help me with it? Yeah. But people did respond and say, thank you for making this. This is, you know, and then I had like a good conversation with many people, and even if at the end of the day nobody like directly reached out to me and I directly was, you know, some source of good for them, like that somebody who was going through some depression or some suicidal thoughts or whatever it might have been, it was still really beneficial because the conversation was happening among so many people.
Exactly. And the idea behind it for me was when I was thinking about how exactly did I want to go about this, because usually whenever any Islamic nonprofit or in general like any organization thinks about creating a trend or something like that, they think about, okay, I need to get an influential person to participate in it because then that person is going to make it gain traction, whatever, increase viewership. When I shared, so I was sharing the flyer and the hashtag to all my like to all my groups like that I'm part of, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, and even like privately texting people like my friends and stuff. I told them, it's like the intention is not to raise money at all, right? The intention is not to make this popular. Right. The intention is just to, you know, hopefully normalize this conversation, right, within our community, right? Because we're so scared to talk about certain things. We're so like, you know, it's intimidating. It's a scary topic, you know, like, and I think I mentioned in the video that I posted that, I did, that there's a lot of issues the Muslim community is facing, and alhamdulillah, where the Muslim community is getting to a place where we can start talking about mental health. But suicide is like one of those topics that we're still so uncomfortable talking about because it's so raw and it's really scary if you think about it, right? Yeah. Like how it has its weight for sure. So can we have that conversation, or at the very least just tell people that, hey, you know, I might not have experience, I might not have the skills needed to help you, but at the very least I'm willing to provide that, like as you put it, the warmth, right, that you may need. And if we can just share that, you know, like even if there isn't like, you know, any monetary like value or any monetary like, you know, accomplishment, like if I look at numbers like, 100,000 views, whatever, no. Even if one person could just be like, oh, you know, I appreciate that. Thank you. That's it. That's it. We did what we needed to do.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And also the nature of some of those, like you said, sometimes when people have movements like these or make posts like this, they'll try to get someone really influential that says something about it. Yeah. And those are always, they seem so ingenuine. Yeah. And that's why, like, this was especially powerful because it was your friend. Like, dude, what was that thing? When Corona started, I don't know if you caught this, but the celebrities, like,
I saw it,
and they got gunned down for it, and they should have gotten gunned down for it because they were so out of touch with.
Yeah, out of touch is the right word.
Yeah. I get the intentions behind it, but then the problem with stuff like that is, especially in our society where, you know, it's like, you know, we were going through a pandemic, right? Yeah. When more privileged people were telling people who are underprivileged or, you know, struggling that, you know, it's okay or whatever. Yeah. It's kind of hard to like listen to that.
It's like, don't you have a pool in your backyard?
Like, oh my God.
People were losing jobs, you know what I mean? Yeah. Why? And it wasn't a good time. It was distasteful to try something like that. The intentions obviously is commendable, but intentions can only take you so far.
Exactly. So you mentioned how like the suicide awareness thing. It was you made the post, but you made it through ICNA Relief.
Yeah.
So I've never really heard of. There's a lot of other. I was gonna say Islamic relief organizations, but
Islamic relief is an organization. Yeah.
There's a lot of other organizations like that, and I've never seen. Yeah. From other organizations like this, you know, we have like there's a bunch. ICNA Relief is kind of like at the forefront of suicide awareness, and this is like really important. So is this like a recent thing that like the emphasis on like mental health and suicide?
No, so ICNA Relief, and I take some of that blame there, is that most of the services we've been providing to the community has been like over a decade, right? Like I want to say that before ICNA Relief even had like its brand name, ICNA Relief, which was like, I want to say 15 years ago, they've been providing services to the Muslim community for about 50 years. But they're so like I'm not trying to humble brag here when it comes to ICNA Relief, but it's just the reality. They're so focused on doing genuine work for the community that they kind of struggle when it comes to promoting it, right? Mm-hmm. Which is like, you know, like, hey, we're doing this work. Yeah. And everyone has their niche, right? Some organizations do promotion very well, right? Yeah. They promote the heck out of like one event, you know, and it makes it sound like that they're doing a lot of work, which is good because it raises awareness, right? Everyone plays their role. ICNA Relief is one of those few organizations that I'm proud to say likes to get their hands dirty. Like they're in the field, right? When the pandemic happened, when COVID-19 happened, I remember a lot of organizations, a lot of our partners were like, you know, we're just not going to work with clients anymore. Yeah. And I don't know if it was just bravery or just plain like stupidity, you know, and I don't want to put it that harshly, but ICNA Relief decided we're going to still work with the community. Right. The community needs it more than ever. Like literally, my bosses are saying that to us, right? Yeah. And that's commendable, right? It just shows like how, you know, where your intentions are, and those intentions kind of flow into your work and like how you work. Mm-hmm. So the mental health services have been running across the country for a while now, but a lot of community members didn't know about it. One, because we're a charity organization, so more privileged communities would not even expect that we're providing a service like this, because this kind of service is a privilege. Like even in I guess middle class society, not a lot of people can afford therapy because it's mad expensive. What are you gonna drop like $200 easily for a therapy session, right? Yeah. And most insurances don't even cover it. I think Hassan Minhaj had like an episode on this, right? Who he talks so much detail about like the challenges that people face. So imagine if you're underprivileged.
And you know what else? Specifically for Muslim people, and I guess anyone who's like who has like anyone who has a strong conviction in any one thing that is like the guiding principle for like anything they do. Like for Muslim people, many Muslim people, the guiding principle for what we do is to relate things back to our deen. And even if you can find a therapist that's like, oh, this works with my insurance, this and that. Yeah. It's hard to, I'm sure any therapist could still like help you out. But I'm sure it's hard to some extent when a therapist is helping someone, when that person has such a strong conviction in something and it almost goes over the therapist's head. Yeah. You get what I'm saying?
No, I absolutely agree.
And that's like, ICNA Relief, I guess, offers that avenue where like you can go to someone, get professional help, but then still like be on that same wavelength where like this is what's like really important.
So there is that like issue that conversation is continuously happening, right? That do you need to have a Muslim therapist to receive therapy, right? Like, are you going to lose something if you go to a non-Muslim? So that there's both sides of the argument, right? Like you would like to have someone who can understand your cultural issues, who can understand like your religious issues, right? Because they would be able to understand like the depth of it, right? Most therapists, not all, an ideal therapist is basically trained to, if they're not even part of your culture, religion, whatever, right? They're at the very least able to be empathetic and active listeners. So it won't necessarily affect the therapeutic process. However, there are going to be roadblocks. Like, you don't want to be in a situation where while you're like having that therapeutic relationship with someone, you're in the therapy, right? Like, you're in like an hour session, you're 20 minutes in, but now you need to spend 10 minutes explaining a certain kind of practice or something like that. And then, like I said, ideally therapists should be able to have active listening skills, be able to be empathetic and understanding and respectful of people's differences, right? But that's not always the case. There are therapists who do, without realizing their biases get in the way, and then they treat you a little differently, or they say certain things that might be hurtful, for someone who's practicing a certain religion or comes from a certain certain demographics. So yeah, ICNA Relief, our therapists are all Muslims, so we make sure that is a priority for us, and we make sure that they receive training so that they're culturally competent when it comes to different cultures as well. So that doesn't become a problem for the most part.
The reason, so that had always been like, I remember like, recently some of my friends, I was talking to one of them about potentially seeing a therapist, about them potentially seeing a therapist, and the question came up of like whether or not they should see a Muslim therapist, and like I had kind of been thinking about that for a little bit, and I just finished the book, an audiobook, by the way. We talked about this on audiobooks are sick. I love audiobooks. I highly recommend, because you could just, like, this place 2 weeks ago or a couple weeks ago was not nearly as clean as it was.
I was about to say, it does look really
right?
Good. Yeah.
But audiobook in 1 year and you're cleaning and you don't even notice it.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's a side tangent. But
Audible sponsor us, but yeah.
Actually, this was on Apple Books, but
we'll
bleep that out. Audible, please. What do we want? Audible or Apple Books?
So we'll just put both, and then we'll like whichever one sponsors us first. We'll
yeah. We promise. Yeah. Anyways, right, the book, audiobook. So I was reading this book, I guess listening, and it's called No More Mr. Nice Guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. But it's now apparently like a lot of people think that the book is for like a certain type of person, but any like the therapist that wrote it, or is there? Sometimes I get confused between psychiatrist and therapist. He's a therapist. He recommended it for like all men. He's like, any man can get some benefit from this. And I was reading the book and it was really good, and it made me really introspective, but there were some parts of it so he recommended that maybe in like when you're trying to do some healing in this sense or that sense. For example, I'll just say what one chapter was about. One chapter was about sexual health. Now, as you can imagine, a non-Muslim might have different ideas about what sexual health looks like than a Muslim.
Yeah.
And so he was recommending like, this type of masturbation or that type of masturbation. Now, of course, as Muslims, we have to look at that and be like, okay, maybe like the principle behind what he's saying is true and good, but that maybe in our practice of how we heal ourselves and go through our own, psychological journey is not the same as what he would recommend. So there is this like, what's it called? There's this
dichotomy. I don't know if that's the proper word.
There's this what's the word I'm looking for here? There's a distinction to be made sometimes between like what they're saying and like how we should interpret it. You
really have to filter it out. The thing is that, and this is actually like the discipline of psychology in general, right? It's become very westernized, right? And not in a it's arguable if it's a bad thing or a good thing, right? There's a lot of like theories behind it, because and even secular education in general has become very westernized. Actually, there's a book that I would highly recommend people to check out. It's from Ustad Mikhail Smith from Qalam. He wrote a book called The Heart and Mind, which basically talks about the prophetic emotional intelligence, but he takes an Eastern lens. And one of the first things that he addresses is how the Western academia hijacked, or not hijacked, but basically started taking over the narrative of what it means to like the spiritual sciences, right? One of them being like psychology, is like things that you cannot like substantially see, right? Like you have to there's different ways of like measuring that. So that's one problem, right? Which is like, okay, how do you navigate through that? How do you filter through that, right? Another thing is that it's also so one can argue that, okay, why wouldn't you want someone who believes in the same things you believe in, likes the same things you like, right? Another problem is that a lot of people, they're not necessarily proud of being like Muslim, right? Or being like from a certain ethnicity. And they would prefer someone who doesn't come from their, or maybe they are, but they struggle with certain things. So like one of the things, like a lot of my clients, they struggle with pornography. Now, they're terrified about telling me that. Like, I don't find that out in like the first session. And then I want to clarify, I'm not a therapist, but I work with clients like on a regular basis when it comes to like helping them and connecting them resources, like as a social worker. So when I work with them, is sometimes the sexual health becomes a topic, and particularly when it comes to men or male clients, and pornography addiction, masturbation, stuff like that. They're so embarrassed to talk about it, like to the point where they just have cooped up, and it's just like it's a double life that they're living. Now, and then when they see like I respond normally to it, they're like, I was expecting you to freak out or say like this is haram and just call it a day, and like. Why didn't you? Like, because I understand that this is something you're going through, and we're going to talk about it. I'm not going to demonize you because of, something you're struggling with. You know what I mean? I'm here to help you. I'm not here to bash you. So that's something that, like some people, they just prefer not being with someone who has the same beliefs that they do, because they might feel that they're going to be judged or criticized because they're not meeting the ideal. I don't pray 5 times a day. I don't, I listen to music recreationally or whatever, right? I use recreational drugs or something, right? They want to go see a Muslim therapist, but they're like, I shouldn't because I'll get that backlash. Right. So that's just, it's a weird place to navigate, right? One doesn't fit all, but I personally believe that as long as you're just able to filter out the good and just leave the bad, right? And how you're able to do that is basically a lot of self-reflection, right? Understanding what you believe, because most of us probably don't know that because we don't self-reflect, right? We're reactive, which is that when someone challenges our belief set, then we're like, oh, what is my belief? Why am I being intimidated by this? Or why am I being quote unquote triggered by this specific, like narrative? And then that forces us to, self-reflect and like, oh, I believe in this, that's why, right? Or I don't believe in this, that's why. So just being able to take the proactive approach, looking into what you believe in, being confident in that, and then slowly challenging it by exposing yourself to certain things. So like, for example, that book, I'm sure there's a lot of good tips there, right? And yes, people should be reading it. At the same time that they should be aware that, okay, as a Muslim, I believe in certain things. When I come from a certain cultural background, I believe and practice certain things, and they might not go alongside with these certain practices, or there's certain advice. That doesn't mean that I'm gonna completely boycott it. No.
Right, exactly.
I'm gonna take the good out of it, but just with a grain of salt.
Right, exactly. And that's the approach that I kind of take. Reading the book there's a lot of good to be learned from the book, and there's an immense amount of transformation it can inspire within a person. But you have to have the filter, and you have to have developed a filter, a strong enough filter, and you have to really work on that. Actually, I was going to talk about this conversation of Islamic schools and public schools. But
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
So I just wanted to interject on the conversation we were just having and ask a somewhat personal question and see how you would handle it. But basically, in the line of work you do, a lot of people come to you for advice and seeking help, right? But then I feel like the issue, from at least what I'm seeing, is sometimes there's a distinction between what we think is good as Muslim people and what society would view as acceptable, right? And that a lot of Muslims have encounters with that problem, and I'm basically wondering, how would you go out to solve that problem per se, and then also how does it affect you mentally? I know people are going to come to you with different things, and they might not always end up deciding to do the thing that is better for them through the perspective of Islam, but they'll continue to do that anyway. And I'm sure that you've had to play your part in several of those situations. So does that affect you in any way and things like that?
So I do have my own moral compass, right? As a Muslim, as a human being, whatever my ideologies are, right? Like what makes me me. So let's say, for example, someone comes to me with a problem that is something that may be considered un-Islamic, right? Like we'll go into like premarital sexual relationships, right? So it's one thing, like, for someone coming to me and saying that, hey, I have someone who I'm dating, right? We just talk, we see at school. There's another thing when someone comes to me is like, I'm sexually active with someone, right? Yeah. And then like the concerns and challenges that come with that, right? So there's a few things that you have to consider when it comes to these situations. One is like what role you're playing, right? If as a therapist, which I'm not in this case, right? I take a different role, which is like I have to work with the client when it comes to what is their desirable outcome and work with them to accomplish that, right? That's a very dumbed down way of saying it, but that's kind of like the summary there. But let's say a friend or someone who's a peer, someone from a community member, right, who's like coming to me and is like, I look up to you, I need advice, this is what I'm going through, right? I first had to differentiate myself from that conversation. Like what this person does not reflect on me in any way. Like that's something I have to remind myself, right? That's not about me, it's about them. Two is like, what is the reason why they're coming to me for? Like, if someone is coming to me and says I'm sexually active and I want to stop, then obviously that aligns more towards my moral beliefs, right? Yeah. So I'm going to be like, great, let me help you there, right? But if someone says like, I'm sexually active and my parents found out and they're kicking me out, I don't know where to go. Can you help me figure out a way to work things out with my family? Mm-hmm. So the main issue here is what? That they want to work things out with their family, right? Mm-hmm. But that problem is there, right? Which is like they're sexually active. Do I address that? Well, if I'm their friend, obviously I can say a lot more because I know that there is that trust, there's that, there's a different dynamic. Right. But as someone who's coming, who looks up to me, or someone who's like coming for advice, right? I have to be very careful of how I word it because at the end of the day, like I think I mentioned this before, but like a good teacher is someone who doesn't, give the answers to people, right? I'm just supposed to provide the tools and like reframe the situation in a way that makes it easier for them to handle it. Right. So I'll work with them when it comes to addressing the issue, the immediate issue. I may, depending on the situation, point out that, by the way, you shouldn't be doing this in the first place, right? But it depends on what there's a few things in that, right, which I'll go into in a little bit, but it depends on, one, the relationship I have with the person, but then how I go about it when it comes to reframing it, right? So let's say, in this case, I'm telling the person, the last thing I want to do is make this person feel like I'm judging them, right? Because I'm in no means a person who has the authority to judge them, right? At the end of the day, we're all humans. We all make mistakes, right? And like you said, one thing that you mentioned earlier is that, society accepts it, but, Islam may not. So in this case, they might not even feel like they're making a mistake, right? Like they probably think that what they're doing is completely right. And in my way of helping them address like the conflict that they're dealing with, am I enabling the behavior? I would like to say no, right? It's two different things. I have to understand that, I'm not living their life, right? So at the end of the day, I'm just doing the best I can to make sure that they're in a better place. Why? Because as human beings, we want to obviously help other people. We want to make sure that we help them get to, whatever their desirable outcome is, especially if it's causing conflict, right? If a family is being broken because of issues like this, right? And this is a very, very, like, it's more common than what we will like to admit, right? Premarital sexual relationships, being sexually active before marriage. It's more common in our community than we would like to admit, right? And it does affect families, but there's more extreme issues, such as like, I'm going to elope and you're going to not do anything about, like, you're going to have to deal with it, right? Like, for those of you who don't know what elope means, it's like basically getting married without, I don't know, man. Like people.
I'm just gonna say quick sidebar. I was talking to my friends the other day, and I thought elope just meant get together. I didn't realize there's a running away part.
Yeah.
So, man, people are eloping left and right. They're just like, who the hell do you know that's eloping?
Well, it is true. People are eloping left and right, but it's not. But yeah, it is more extreme.
Whenever I hear the word elope, I think of like just like in a Bollywood film, like people like going off on a train and like.
So that's the thing. So I actually like that you mentioned that. A lot of people think like that when they're in those situations, right? When you are going through something, especially when you think you're entitled to do it, right? You're only seeing it from your lens. What ends up happening though is that you're forgetting your parents and how does that affect them? You're forgetting your siblings and you're forgetting everyone else, you know? So you have a lot of people, they're just
it's
so
romanticized.
Yeah, it's very romanticized, right? And I'm just we're not even just talking about elope here. We're talking about many things, right? We tend to like only have a narrow vision of what the consequences are going to be. So when it actually goes down and they're not ready for the consequences, that's when a lot of people are like, oh, what do I do now? Yeah. Then they go to someone for advice when the damage has been done. You know what I mean? And I'm all for people pushing to do what they want to do, right? But I believe that there's a certain way of going about it. Yes, there's a less desirable way and a more desirable way. But ultimately, what has happened, right? Now it's the issue is like addressing these issues, what's going on right now. So just to like wind back to what we were talking about, in those, it's like the simple answer is like, yes, it does affect me, but I have to be very careful to who I'm working with and how I present it, because the last thing I want to do, I have to first check my intentions too, right? Because there are maybe times that I don't like to use this word very, like I don't like to use this word, but it's a very general use term, like triggered, right? There may be certain situations and certain cases where someone is dealing with something and they're coming to me for help that I may get triggered, right? But here's the problem there. Why?
Did you say that you may get triggered?
I might get triggered. So for example, let's say this is a real thing. This is something that bothers me. Is like when a younger person is like bad mouthing someone who's older, right? That bothers me a lot. I don't know why. Well, actually, I do know why now, right? But at the time when I used to face these things, I didn't know, and I would get defensive, and I'd be like, "Why are you doing that?" Da 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 da, right? Or like for example, parents. A lot of parents, they like to they come to me for advice. Early on in my journey of doing this kind of work, I couldn't relate to parents. Like it bothered me so much. That comes from like my personal life experiences, right? But at the time I didn't know. So when a father comes to me and they're complaining about like their child, it bothers me. It bothered me so much to the point where I started blaming them. So you know what I was doing? I made it about me without realizing it. You get what I'm saying? And I just like shut them down, right? I'm not listening to them. I'm basically I'm not helping them in any way. Right. And that's something you really want to avoid. I feel like a lot of people tend to do that when they're trying to help someone, right? And even because they're focused on the part that they don't like. Yeah. That's not what the person is coming to you for, right? The person's coming to you for this thing. They trust you and they trust your ability to provide a service. Right. If you cannot do it, you acknowledge that. They're like, hey, I'm sorry, this is I think above me or something that I don't have the expertise to like address. I would recommend someone else. This is actually something that therapists tend to do, is like, we all are human beings. There's certain things that affect us more than others, right? Yeah. One of the things that we used to talk about in school in my grad program was to identify what are certain demographics, right, that you just did not want to work with, certain client base, right? Some people were, for some therapists or for some students, it was people who batter women. Like they were like, I can't help someone like that, right? But yeah, they're like, I just don't feel for that person. Right. So for other people, it's like rapists. For other people, it's like, like LGBTQ community. For other people, it's like, everyone has their own like whatever. But you need to, 1, be aware of it. 2, understand where is it coming from. And then 3, just be honest. Can you work with a demographic like that or not, right? And you may be able to challenge yourself so you can grow and learn and become a better person. Or just absolutely not, you know what I mean? Because what is the main thing that's supposed to happen here? It's the person, their help, right? So if you're not able to provide it, humble yourself and just back away. Right. So there has been cases where I simply can't help someone, but that required a level of, I would like to say maturity that I didn't have early on in my career that I had to develop because it was affecting people, right? But it took years of like, just self-reflection, understanding, right? Separating myself from the client, which happens from time to time. I see myself in the client. I see myself in the friend or the person that I'm trying to help, and then I kind of like go overboard, it's very normal, but you need to be aware of it.
I want to come back to this, but just a side tangent. This was actually one of the things I was going to mention earlier. But you mentioned how like one of the things you have to keep in mind is you're not trying to give this person the answer, and they also are not trying to. Maybe like they think they are to some degree, but I imagine they're not trying to go there to get an answer, but they're trying to become the person who comes to the answer.
Yeah.
Kind of, right? And like I guess that also comes into when you're transforming them into whoever they have to become to choose the right decision. You remove yourself from whatever choice they make if you want to like help them out the most, I would imagine.
So, were you finished?
No, yeah.
So, one thing that we say as therapists is that we didn't do any of the hard work. The client's the one who ultimately does all the hard work, right? Like they're the ones who put all the effort in and everything like that. We're just showing them, like how to go about it.
Right.
So yeah, so it's not. I wouldn't say it's completely accurate to say that you completely remove yourself from the outcome, right? Because let's say, for example, there's a suicidal client and then they end up committing suicide on your watch.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you just be like, oh, that's not my fault? There's a fine line between, understand. That's a very complicated, very heavy topic in itself. But, what do you do in those cases, right? So it's not, I guess it wouldn't be accurate to say, and if I did say that, I retract that statement, which is that, like you completely disassociate yourself from the outcome. Yeah. But basically you more so what you're trying to do is that you're trying to understand, you're trying to make it about the client, right? So you're making sure that you're not bringing your baggage, your issues and putting it in there, which a lot of people tend to do, right? Yeah. And it requires no one is just born with that. Yeah. That's something you kind of fine tune as you grow as a human being, and in this case as a professional, right? Yeah. You really need to actively be aware of it, and that's something that it takes time.
The thing is that I think it's also really important that you shared your story because, like we were talking about earlier, now we can shift gears back to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Earlier. What we were talking about earlier was, before when we were talking about when the Suicide Awareness Week thing happened and how we wanted to be familiar faces to people, it's really important that you share your story so that people can find comfort in their own stories through your story.
When people hear me talk about my things so freely, like I'm sure that when people watch this video and they hear some of that stuff, they'll be like, how is he so comfortable talking about it? Yeah. It's not that, like in my case, I didn't have a choice, right? Like the community kind of found out, so I either chose to either run away from it or own it. It was one of the biggest blessings in disguise, right? Because I was more comfortable to talk about it. And through that, I was able to, and it's not the best way to go about things. Like, trauma bonding is not something that I encourage. Trauma bonding is basically when you bond. It's a very dumbed down way as like bonding through your trauma. Yeah. It's not a healthy way to make friendships or anything. But one thing that I definitely really appreciate, and like I said, so, like I was mentioning, if there's one theme for everything, it's qadar. Literally everything that happened, it wasn't planned. Yeah. It wasn't like a scheme. It wasn't like nothing. It just happened. You couldn't
expect it, and you couldn't I feel like almost in any given situation that you were in, like right now, I'm like okay.
It's hard to process.
I'm like okay, tomorrow this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen, and then none of those things happen. And it's for every step in the way of your story, it felt like it was just something that
out of left field every time.
So the most important thing that I really want people to know is that it didn't matter where life threw me in, I tried my best in it. And that's something that a lot of people, I've realized, don't do. That they have a certain plan in their head, and life doesn't go that way. Sure as heck for me, it didn't go that way either. I was hoping that I would have been in a PhD program by now, right? When I came to my goals, I'm not. I was hoping I would have had a videography business ready by now. I don't, right? I would have hoped that this is me being a little bit more vulnerable here, but I would have expected myself in a financial bracket by now, right? Now that I'm out of grad school, whatever. Absolutely not. But is that a reason for you to just give up? Absolutely not. You know what I mean? Whatever life. So there's this one saying that I really like. I'm gonna kind of butcher it, but bear with me. It's basically called the Serenity Prayer. Have you heard of it? The Serenity Prayer. It's a Stoic belief, and it says God, please give me the serenity or peace to understand what I cannot change and be content with it. Right? Please give me the courage to be able to change what I can, and please give me the wisdom to differentiate to figure out what the difference is, right? Yeah. And that's what life is about. You know what I mean? so many times human beings, right, people, because we're so results oriented, right, and we don't focus on the journey, we don't focus on the process, right, we find love, right, we graduated, we got the job. These are all accomplishments. We don't look at the process. The process is the accomplishment. What makes an accomplishment? What gives it value, right? What gives it value is the journey, how hard you work on it, right?
It's not the destination.
It's not, exactly. And we tend to forget that. Why? Because our brains are wired this way. We need to train ourselves, right? This is why people go through like Navy SEAL training, all these things, right? Because it's not about like, they're not fearless. They just get comfortable in that uncomfortable situation. And journeys are uncomfortable. They're scary, you know? You just like, please give me what I want, you know? But sometimes that's not what's important. It's what you went through. Yeah. So like we tend to forget that, you know what I mean? Like we're so focused on things that we cannot control that we just let ourselves down. Like we're like, oh my God, you know, like if only this, if only that, if only this, right? And then we go to certain people to help us, like, you know, figure out that thing that we cannot control until eventually life just humbles us to the point where we realize, I just can't control this. Yeah. What am I going to do about it? What I can control is how I feel, how I behave, what I do today, what I do tomorrow. And that's something that I didn't do intentionally. Like, I wasn't like this wise guru who was like, you know what? I know the answers of reality. I subconsciously did that. You know what I mean? And I failed in certain times and I succeeded in certain times, right? Yeah. In all those years, yes, I failed classes. I have, the people who, like I mentioned, that I helped, there were many people who I made their lives a lot harder, right? It wasn't just always sunshine and rainbows when it came to successes, right? Yeah. But what does the community see? What do people see? They only see the results. They don't see the journey, right? Yeah. We only look at, this guy's married, or this person, got their bachelor's, or they got this job. They don't look at how hard it took you. Like that whole that analogy of like the iceberg, right? We only look at the tip of the iceberg. We don't look at like the big part of the below. Yeah. It's absolutely true. Absolutely 100% true. No one's going to look at how hard you work. No one's going to look at anything. No one's going to care, right? Ultimately, people are going to judge me based off of like these jobs that I'm applying for example, right? That I was mentioning, or like things that I'm doing, right? Yeah. No one's going to look at, like what I've gone through, right? Like, oh my God, this is incredible or ridiculous or like scary, right? Like however way you want to take it. They're only going to look at what did you accomplish? I don't care who you are. What did you accomplish? Yeah. So, you know what I mean? Like we shouldn't think like that.
So don't get too obsessed with the end result.
If you're so focused on the outcome, you're going to, you know what I mean? Like that's one of the reasons. And I still have to tell myself that. Yeah. Like in some ways I'm like that too. Like working out is a big one for me. Mm-hmm. Working out is a big one for me. I'm always results oriented when it comes to working out because it's uncomfortable. Yeah. I'm pushing myself, right? And I'm so busy looking at like results that when I don't get it, and especially, and I think one of the questions you were asking me is like, the social media and stuff like that influence. I don't know if you want to go about that in a little bit, but like it is true. Those things have impacts on us. There's a documentary on Netflix. I'm sure you've heard of it called The Social Dilemma.
A recent guest.
Was it Yusuf?
Yusuf, it was Yusuf.
Yeah. So The Social Dilemma is it gives you insight to things that we already know, but most of us just choose to ignore it. Yeah. Is that the reason why social media and all these things are killing the game is not because there's more money out there in the world. It's not because of like, there's this magic theory that they've invented. Yeah. They understand human psychology and they know how to manipulate it. Yeah. It's just like Maslow's theory, right? Like not Maslow's theory. Pavlov, right? Yeah. When he talks about like, the bell rings and the dog salivates, right? Yeah. We're a bunch of just advanced dogs that salivate every time we hear the ring, because we're conditioned to do that. It is very scary when you think about it, right? Yeah. And that's what The Social Dilemma talks about. But imagine now that is your psychology, and now take that away from the social media world and put that into your real world. Yeah. Put that into your relationships. Put that into your work. Put that into your self-development, right? Yeah. That's it. We just want things immediately. Immediately. It's dopamine. Just like it's so contagious.
We lose
like
sight.
Intoxicating.
We lose like I guess like this. We lose the idea of the process. I saw this video a little while ago, and it changed the way that I worked out or did anything that was like hard. After that, it completely changed the way I looked at things. So every other video that I had seen was, you want to look like this, do this. and he was like, forget about that. Just focus on what you feel during the workout.
Yeah.
And just live in that moment and live in the process.
Yeah.
And feel it, like really feel it. And like really come to be familiar with that, really come to like it if you can.
Yeah.
And like if you're results oriented, there's a lot of results oriented people that work out and eventually they get to where they want to be. But like life also kind of sucks for them because they're working out and they hate every second of it.
Not even that. Here's the thing, right? I had this conversation with a kid recently. So this kid comes up to me and he's like, Danyal, I am struggling to find meaning in life. Mm-hmm. And we were having this long conversation. Literally, he was just picking up something from my house. And we ended up staying in front of the house for like 2 hours just talking. Uh-huh. And then we were talking about like working out and stuff. Yeah. He was like, man, like I've tasted the results because he used to be fit for a while, right? He was overweight. Yeah. He was very fit, and then he's now overweight again. Yeah. He's like, I know what it tastes like, and I want that again. I was like, yeah, but what happened after you tasted it? Yeah. He was like, why did you end up losing weight again? Like that's what I asked him. Like, why did you end up losing weight again? Yeah. He was like, because I couldn't go any further. He was like, I met my goal. Yeah. And he was like, and the other goals were just like not physically possible for me. Right. I was like, that's why. Because you were so focused on your results, you know what I mean? Yeah. That everything else just became meaningless. Right, you know what I mean? Exactly. You don't cherish, and this is another thing, right? Like, we'll go into video games. I love video games, and when I give talks, I usually use video games and anime as my analogy, so I apologize for that ahead of time. But in video games, there's this new genre of video games that are coming out, or they've been coming out now, and I hate it, is in-game purchases, right? Oh. Basically, it doesn't matter how skilled you are in a game. But if you can buy like this armor, this gun, right? You're gonna just be OP.
You play Hearthstone by any chance?
What happened?
You play Hearthstone by any chance?
I don't. So here's the thing though. Here's a problem with that. What happens when you buy all that gear? How much fun is the game then?
It's not.
It's not, right? You play, you get that hype for being
it's fun for
a little while, right? You get what you want, but then it's over. You lose it. But then guess what? Imagine if you built your way throughout with your squad and you guys all struggled and lost together and whatever, and then finally got your way to the high up, like the top 100 percentile, right, in ranking, or even the first, right? How good is that gonna feel? How good is that? Because you guys all experienced it together. Yeah. You guys were all focused. You put the hard work. The victory is much more sweeter, right? Life is like that too. And you remember earlier when we were talking about like, a good teacher doesn't give an answer, the solution? This is absolutely why. Right. What are you going to do with that knowledge? Think about it. This device is the most, like the biggest encyclopedia in the entire world. Has everything that you can want, right? And more. But we don't value it. Yeah. We don't maximize its potential. Why? Because we didn't work for it. We didn't walk to we genuinely didn't. You get what I'm saying? So what happens as a response to that? Ungrateful people. No, ungrateful is probably a harsh word, but I hope you get what I'm trying to say by that. Yeah. Basically, people who don't understand the value of what they have because they didn't work. They didn't necessarily work for it, right? Mm. And that's something that I feel like in a privileged society, we need to learn to balance that out. We're living in a very superficial world, right?
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, continue what were you going to say.
We're living in a very superficial world, a world that's, designed to cater to this fake, this fake way that we live. Mm. And the way that we live and the way that we work and the way that we measure success and everything is all fake. It's not how the world has lived for many, many years. Yeah. But because of that, now we have these high these unrealistic versions of efficiency, accomplishment, standards, right? That just kills us inside, right? It's not human. It's not human. So, now, and we're mass producing it, which is the worst thing. You know what I mean? Mm. The standard is just across the board. So we have people with different kinds of skill sets and different kind of geniuses, right? Because I believe that every person has a genius in them. Every person has potential for greatness. Why? Because you're breathing and you're living in this world. That's why. You know what I mean? If you look at statistics, it's very slow chance, very, 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 very low chance that you would have been able to come into this world and you were able to do that. We're all just a bunch of very lucky people in terms of statistics that are on this ground. But we don't realize that, right? And this world is making it, unfortunately, harder for people to see how special we are and what we're capable of, right? Mm-hmm. Because we have these unrealistic standards, right? For the majority of human history, a person can only influence up to, or a person could humanly only interact with 150 people regularly.
Right.
Now that's in the thousands, if not in the millions.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
So I was you mentioned before like social media, and that's also I assume what you're kind of getting at right now. So one of the things that you mentioned was kind of like, you know, getting this instant gratification, you can call it, from doing in-store purchases, and that's a theme kind of in society right now, is this instant gratification. One of our recent guests, Idan, he was talking about like so first we had YouTube. First we had books, right? And that's where you like consume things. And then you have YouTube, it's like 10 minutes. And then you have like Instagram, which is like 1 minute, like gimme. And now you have TikTok, which is like 6 seconds. Do it now, give it to me right now, this instant, or I'm scrolling.
Yeah.
And the reason, so I guess this is gonna segue into a different conversation, is ADHD. Now this is something that's been really like really intriguing to me, because I remember watching a documentary in high school that was like made by Scientologists or something about like why it doesn't exist or something. It was like something like that, right? It was like why ADHD is like this like extremely exaggerated problem in like psychology right now. And so obviously like you've been through quite a bit of schooling in psychology, and so like what is ADHD like a real problem that we need to be like very cognizant of? And then also like something like TikTok being like 6 second, give me this now, or scroll. How does that play into that?
So do you know the correlation rule, which is like
causation is not
causation? Yeah. So A plus B does not necessarily equal C, right? Yeah. So things like TikTok and things like Instagram and all the like instant gratification things may seem correlated with, you know, like the increase of ADHD and a few other diagnoses, but it doesn't necessarily cause it, right? So I want to put that out there. When it comes to ADHD is a combination of multiple symptoms, neurological as well as like I guess biological, right? Like when it comes to impulses, and then when it comes to how you think. And it is a real thing. Like it's not like it's not a real thing. But
do you think it's exaggerated?
I don't think it's
overdiagnosed.
Oh, so overdiagnosed. There's a difference of opinion on that. There's a difference of opinion on that, right? So I'm in the camp that it is overdiagnosed.
Okay.
I'm in the camp that it is overdiagnosed, right? But of course, I'm welcome to any discussion from any professional, and I don't disagree. Like I don't want to discredit what other people believe, but I personally come to the opinion that it is overdiagnosed. Now, but here's the thing: you have to also understand psychology in terms of practice, right? It's fairly new. Like it's not like 1,000 years old, I guess. Right. You know, it's like it's fairly new. On top of that, the world that we're living in is a lot newer. Yeah. It's constantly growing. People who lived 30 years, like people who experience like who can remember 30 years ago or even 10 years ago will know that this world is a lot different, right? And even this year in particular is probably the beginning of a new age of like another 10 years, right? God knows, maybe even 5. And especially in the past like 50 years, technology has grown at an increasing rate. And, you know, obviously with that, a lot of like different things have grown. So the reason I'm mentioning all this is not to like give a social class, but to talk about like the different changes that have happened in terms of our standards of society, right? And in terms of our standards of behavior and performance. With those changes have also, you know, like changes, certain categories, I guess, or certain like standards of human behavior have also been established, right? So there's that one problem, which is like human beings are now performing at an extremely inhuman efficient rate, right? Which is thanks to the improvement of computers and something else. But it puts, not everyone is designed to work like that. That's one. 2, the problem is that the education has become standardized. The kinds of like tools that people are taught have become standardized. So everyone's expected to be able to do the same, which is another problem. And then 3rd, okay, all that is fine, but then when it comes to nurture, when it comes to social issues, when it comes to family issues, that is unequal. So we've equalized like the playing field when it comes to all the pros.
Yeah.
But when it comes to now creating this workforce or creating this new society, we have extreme inequalities in terms of race, in terms of gender, in terms of like society, right? In terms of financial, right? Like the middle class is decreasing now, right? Like, and it's becoming a large, lower income. Like now our low income standard is the same before inflation. And it's been the same like from God knows how long. Like the theory, the formula that's being used to calculate it is so outdated. And because of that now, we've had to create like adjusted numbers that make people feel like, you know, you're making 50K with the family in New Jersey, and you're like am I poor or am I not?
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Like, and that's sad because you know in New Jersey that's nothing for an individual. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's so many factors that come into play when it comes to answering this question, right? So yes, it is overdiagnosed, but two, there aren't any alternatives at the moment when it comes to certain things. Right. So not therapists, but society is just really pressuring people to, you know, use a certain diagnoses, and I think that will change soon because the field of psychology hasn't been the attention that it's getting now. It's never gotten before. So a lot of funding is going into it, right? People like, you know, like even in the professional world, EQ is a thing. Like 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been the thing. Like, I want a go-getter. I want a shark. I want someone who's aggressive. I don't care how rude he is. And we're going to assume that they're a he because of, like, you know, like social standards, right? But subhanAllah, like, you know, now, and this is what actually Ustad Mikhail Smith talks about in his book, is that the prophetic intelligences, whatever, you know, like plural, they're being used in the professional world.
Yeah. Actually, we were talking in the one episode where we kind of discussed mental health a little bit. One of the points I mentioned was there's this distinction made in people's heads between like masculinity and being in touch or in tune with your emotions and other people's emotions. Yeah. And what we see from the Prophet ﷺ is like this. Obviously, he is the man of men. Like he was the man of men. He had like an extremely masculine side to him, but then also he was extremely in touch with his emotion. Yeah. And with his own emotion, with people around him, and we like recount this from multiple days. So, what were we just talking about? Oh yeah, ADHD. I had another question. Yeah. Or not so much a question, but more so like a little. So what I've noticed is that right now to get prescribed Adderall, people are just like, oh, you want Adderall? Go get it prescribed. Like it seems like it's like really, really, really easy to get it.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is like a whole conspiracy that like, you know, it's like there's no way to prove it, but there you can see it. Like big pharma is just, it's a conglomerate. They own everything. They make the money, right? Mm-hmm. So like when it comes to a lot of these drugs, there's a lot of side effects to them. People who don't need them take them just to study, right? Which I find ridiculous. I remember I was an undergrad and people would be like taking them. And I've heard now it's actually gotten a lot worse compared to back then. Yeah. Like back in the day.
I've never heard this.
Really? Yeah, like there's a lot. People joke around about it. They're like, yo, I took an Adderall. Like it's just a normal thing. Yeah. And I'm like, what?
It is in no way. There's no stigma. There's nothing.
It's a joke.
It's
just like
pop it, you study, and that's how it's become in our culture.
And that's sad. That's sad. It's sad that people have been pushed to that extreme where they're like, you know what, this is the norm. You know, like I need this to perform inhumanly, like, you know, optimal.
Yeah,
that's ridiculous.
I mean,
I was gonna say you can continue.
No, I was gonna say I haven't seen this necessarily with Adderall, but like besides that, I feel like you see that for a whole bunch of things. People are like, I need my coffee to focus, or I need to take this 5 hour energy to focus, or I need like a quick.
Yeah, but Adderall's another level, I would say.
No, but I feel like it's the same concept of like you need to meet requirement just to do another thing. But I feel like no one is setting those boundaries except for yourself.
So dependency is something that. So here's the thing. substance abuse in general, right? Like something as minimal as like coffee, right, to something as extreme as Adderall, or like, you know, any other drug that you would think of. The reason why a lot of people do it is because they just don't like, and it's so complicated. Like I don't even want to like I'm really reluctant to say this because I don't want to oversimplify, because it's not this simple. But there is some truth to what I'm about to say, right? Like, it's not an overall statement, but there is like it is a part of it that people just want to avoid feeling what they feel, right? In general. So like, for example, when you're feeling lazy, it's part of life. You're feeling lazy. Your body's probably telling you something, you know what I mean? But we don't want to feel that because we have a paper that's due tonight, right? So we need that coffee. We need that whatever. Like I'll even argue video games. I love video games, but in moderation, right? It's very important. You can't find joy and excitement in your current life, your life, so you look for it in a virtual world. And I'll be the first to admit it, that I enjoy that. You know what I mean? Like I enjoy saving the world, you know, being the very best that never was, you know, like all those kind of things. It's great. It feels great. Why do you see a lot of boys that play video games? Because, you know, like there's a sense of accomplishment. There's like, it's designed in a way where you feel fulfilled. You're doing tasks, right? That you're not necessarily able to do in the real world for whatever reason. And they're instant and they're quick and they feel good, right? When you beat that boss, why is it that we're willing to work 12 hours to beat that boss level versus like 2 hours to, you know, work on something that is not fun, right? It all like comes into play. So many people who I know that take substances, you know, they one thing that like a huge thing that I laugh. I don't laugh. I internally like giggle, I guess, right? Like a emotional giggle that when I hear someone who says that, oh, you know, but weed calms me down. I'm like, no, duh, it calms you down. You know what I mean? Like that's what it's supposed to do. But is you staying calm a good thing? Yeah. Like, don't you need to process that anger, that frustration, that sadness, so you can grow from it? Yeah. You know, but we don't allow ourselves to process things. We distract ourselves.
We've gotten to a point in society, and a point, you know, considering the workload that many of us had, like you said before, an inhuman point. And so if we have inhuman expectancies of ourselves, then we need to go out of the human.
As society, we need to change that. Like, I don't think we're gonna last.
Like, is there anything that we can do, or do we just adapt and go with it?
I think that adapting is the worst thing ever. Like I mean, you won't have a choice though. The reality is, like, if you don't, you're not gonna make money. You're not gonna have a family. Exactly. Like just stuff like that, right? But I think that it's very important. Like everything, any change you want to make, right? There's this quote that I think is from Rumi, but don't quote me. Or I think it was maybe Imam Ghazali. I don't remember who it was from, but I really like it. I learned it from someone who I really look up to. And I'm going to probably butcher it too. I butcher quotes a lot, by the way. So the quote is that when I was young, I wanted to change the world. Mm-hmm. When I was young and knowledgeable, like I wanted to change the world. Yeah. When I was old and wise, I wanted to change myself. Mm. So you can't change the world. Like that's just the reality of it, right? Like, but you may be able to change the world if you change yourself, right? Like you basically, and this is kind of like a Buddhistic thing, which is like, you know, our reality is very dependent on our perception of it, right? And whatever's internally there is going to externally be around you, right? Exactly. And there is a lot of truth to that, to a certain extent, right? But I feel like to answer your question, right, because I don't want to like drag that on, but yes, you are going to have to do what you need to do in order to survive, sure, right? But at the same time, there are ways to go around about it if you just work on yourself, right? Okay. Understand that, you know, yes, it'll be a harder journey for sure. Like, for example, when we're talking about my story, right? A lot of people told me, it's like, why didn't you just get into drugs or something? Because it was there. It was accessible. And a lot of my friends who I left from Texas, right? They, their parents also had like divorces and stuff. They didn't go through everything I went through, but we very similar stuff. Yeah. They're like potheads, you know, crackheads, going through God knows what, left the family, just, you know, like completely left the deen. And, you know, I may have been like that too. I really hated Islam for a very long time. It took like certain people to get me back, right? Yeah. But I had a choice to make. Was I going to feel what I was feeling, you know, or was I going to, you know, was I going to hide or run away? Yeah. And a lot of people choose to run away. I don't blame them. I don't blame them at all. It's tempting for sure. The world is designed that way. It is tempting. And in some ways I am hiding. I scroll on social media. I play video games, right? I do things that I preach. I encourage people to play video games. I think it's amazing. I think it's really developmentally good too, but in moderation. Everything can be a tool or a weapon, right? And I feel like that you, as long as you're cognizant, right? You'll be okay. Like, for example, the social media, like the social dilemma, they talk about this. They're like, social media is a tool for good, but it's caused so many things. It potentially caused wars in some place, caused genocide in some place because of it affected elections and stuff like that.
The Russian trolls.
Exactly. So what do you do?
Facebook mine or something.
Yes, what do you do? And one of the things that they mention is that even though that they know these things, they also fall in the trap of social media.
Yeah.
So one of the things that they do is what they try to do is just be cognizant. Do small things to just not feed into the bigger cycle. Yeah. And I feel like if enough people do that eventually, because we're going to get sick and tired. At a certain point, it's just not possible to keep going. And everything in life, this is what the curse of life or the beauty of life or whatever you want to call it, nothing in this world is linear. It always has ups and downs. Society is going up. You don't think it's going to go down? I think we're already in the process of going down. We're just not seeing it now until we see another up. Yeah. But you know what I mean? If we can just figure it out, if our laws and everything are too behind because it's so new. But one thing I really liked about one of our candidates in the past who unfortunately didn't make it was Andrew Yang, right? I loved Andrew Yang. I was never politically active. One thing that he really liked about what he talked about was the monetization of data, right? Exactly. Like the fact that, these companies are making millions, if not billions of dollars off of your data. Why can't we have the rights of it and sell it? That could solve so much. But that, you know what it is? And, I don't want to get political or anything, but as a human behavior, we're comfortable with how the system is working right now. It's working, so why not just let it work, right? But no, that's not how it works. We need to challenge the status quo. We need to challenge it. Even if, some people, and everything, any ism that we've faced, right? Yeah. Human rights, gender equality, right? All these different things. It was working for society, but it at the expense of a certain demographic, right? This is affecting people. We just don't see it. It's hidden so cleverly, right? But it is affecting a lot of people, and we're just finding temporary fixes for them, not an actual solution. I feel like that as our lawmakers get more educated in these things and, these conversations actually go into the legal matters as well as social standards, right? And we just learn to become human once again. Yeah. I believe that it will change.
Yeah. Do you think it's trending that way?
For sure. I think it is. It's just a matter of something big. We just need that spark.
Yeah, there's also, so Andrew Yang was a lot younger than everyone else, and so he was more in touch with what kind of problems people are actually going through. And then you have,
but he was, the fact that someone like him was able to even get as far as he did is a good sign. Yeah. Which means that hopefully next year or the next time elections happen, there'll be another person, maybe two or maybe three, maybe four, who God knows, right? Yeah. But the whole point is that we just don't give up, right? We're cognizant, we're aware. If we mindlessly just follow our reality for as it is, and we, in general, just growth, having a growth mindset, just wanting to be better than the version of who you were yesterday, if you just continue to do that in more than one way, inshallah khair, at the very least, your small group of influence, you'll be able to change that. And I believe that firmly. And we see examples of that in our community. Yeah. People who the world doesn't know. Yeah. They don't know who these people are. But they're able to make... Yeah, you guys know them.
And you have power. You have total power. Well, you have power over yourself. You have power over your kids. And then it's the way that someone explained it to me is you work in these concentric circles. And we grow up and we're just fed we have to change the world. There's a lot of people I know who make, for example, this is they make activism posts or so on, right? Trying to affect the global scale, but then within themselves and within their families, they're not looking so deeply at problems that exist there. And I think that's kind of a trend is we kind of want to change the whole world and we want to see the world become what we want it to be. But it starts in these smaller concentric circles and you work outward.
It's messier when you're dealing with your own problems. Yeah. And in general, right? So many people I know who influence the community in certain ways, they have a crazy family life, right? And it usually stems from the fact that it's much scarier to handle your own problems. Why is it that one thing that we actually, as therapists, we're not allowed to do is that we refrain from providing services to people who we know or who we have another relationship with? Why? Because it can be influence and it can cause some major damage. One thing that a lot of people say is, why does a therapist need a therapist? Why does a doctor need a doctor? Technically, a doctor could diagnose themselves, right? But
therapists and Sopranos.
Like, it's literally needs, like, you literally need, like, you need someone who doesn't have any kind of attachment,
right?
You know,
it's
can
actually,
yeah. So the same thing happens with like life, right? When you're someone who's like trying to change the world and everything like that, it's so much easier to do that because it's so much easier to point fingers at someone else, be like, you need to change. I'm going to do that for you, right? But then what's happening at home, right? I love like Plato's. I get a little philosophical. I love like philosophy. So Plato has like this idea of the model government, and one of the things he talks about is like the family dynamic, right? That's very important. In Islam too, you talk about that too. Like when it comes to like like when we're giving like donating and stuff like that, what are you supposed to do? One of the first things you're supposed to do is look inside your own household, then your then your extended family, then your friends, then your community, then random people, right? One of the pitches that we mentioned at Relief is that it's charity begins at home. That's basically our slogan, right? Yeah. It's the sunnah of the Prophet to basically support, you know what I mean, your own before you support others. And there's a reason, there's so much wisdom behind it that I'm so uneducated to not even fully to be able to fully comprehend. But you know, it applies in our lives, right? Why is everyone so, like, for example, social media, right? People are so quick to become advocates because that's like their little way of basically feeling like they're a part of something. But what is the real change that they're making? Are they a part of their local school board? Are they volunteering at their local masjid or something like that? Are they engaged? Are they involved? And that's something that unfortunately it's hard to do with the current society, like how society is like, you know, made, but it's your responsibility, it's your obligation.
So recently, actually, I saw a lot of like, I'll see this stuff on Twitter, I'll see this stuff on Instagram. People will go to family gatherings, people will go to such and such, and they will estrange themselves from their parents because, for example, on an important issue that they're particularly active about, their parents are like on the other side. And they'll write on Twitter, they'll write on Instagram, they're like, I don't stand for that, and they estrange themselves from their parents. And I think that's like, that in a nutshell is like kind of what's happening right now. And there's a lot of people, most people that I know encourage that type of behavior. Personally, I look at that and I'm like, you're trying to change the world, but you're estranging yourself from your parents in the process of doing so. It's kind of like, the level 1 and level 2 that was required for you to go to level 8, you just completely ignored it. You broke off. At the end of the day, what's important to us, because we're not going to change the world, what's important to us is how the world, or like how we change ourselves, like you were saying before, and how we can have that impact on our family. And if you're going to sacrifice something that you cannot do anything about, if you're going to sacrifice the most important relationships to you, like, I feel like that's a trend nowadays. Have you seen posts like this?
Yeah, it's so I'm this might be controversial for me to say, but I'm not a fan of cancel culture at all. So
it's not controversial.
I hate it. I really don't like cancel culture. I've noticed that in a lot of things when it comes to any political, social, you know, like humanistic, whatever you want, even religious, right? Where it's just like, I'm gonna disassociate myself from you because we have different beliefs. Right. How are you going to challenge your thought process if you're going to just be like, hey, I don't like you anymore, bye?
And how are you going to change theirs?
How are you going to change theirs? You talk about changing the world, right? You're going and you're complaining to a artificially created, purposely created group that is designed for you by these tools, right? That agree with everything you agree with, right? The suggestion friend list, everything like that. These are people who believe in the same thing you do. You know what I mean? Like, you're just encouraging yourself. It's just like, you know, like it's like, you know how like everyone makes fun of flat earthers. Why do those communities exist? You know what I mean? They exist because they live in their own bubble. You're just a bunch of flat earthers to me. You know, when I think like that, when I hear people talk like that, I'm like, you're just a flat earther. You're basically someone who doesn't want to listen to, you know, opposition. Now, here's the thing. Maybe and in most cases, this is the case. I'm not saying this isn't the case. In most cases, the opposition is usually very evil in some cases, very, derogatory, whatever, right? Like if we talk about racism or something like that, some people, like, there's this trend that's going on right now. It's like, unfriend me if you believe that racism is not a problem and stuff like that, right? I get that. Yeah. I get that. I wouldn't want to associate myself with someone who's like an outright racist, right? Yeah. I would not want to associate myself with someone like that. However, if I'm not going to, let's say, for example, like, if that person's a family member, right? If that person's like, someone who Islamically you have an obligation to be a part of, and you're choosing to like just leave them, what change did you make? What is that change that you were talking about?
And you have
change is not easy.
Yeah, for sure. You have an obligation, and now we're talking Islamically, but I truly believe that Islamic principles are like, if you dig deep enough, even as a secular person, you can find that Islamic principles such as an obligation to your family are applicable everywhere. Yeah. And you have, so now I'm talking as a Muslim, now the people that I see do this, Muslim people, like a lot of the people on my social media, Muslim people, right? They'll be like, oh, I don't talk to this uncle, this aunt, this. Sometimes their own parents. Sometimes I don't talk to my sibling because my sibling believes this and that. You don't have an obligation. Okay, you have an obligation to those people. And you have much less obligation to anyone else.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say you should be complacent in like how you deal with them, but it means you should not drop them to the curb, but you should take maybe it means you should take more care in like how you approach them.
One of the things about being aware and educated is that, like, I forgot, there was a saying, I can't really remember right now, but it was basically like, it's the second part of ignorance is bliss, right? Mm-hmm. That basically the people who are educated are the ones who are damned, because they're the ones who are always going to be sad, because they know the reality it's much harder to actually create change, whatever. Yeah. And that's the reality of, like, I guess, like, people who are aware that some things are a problem, right? Is that it is extremely hard to understand that there's like hundreds of thousands of reasons why someone is the way that they are. Yeah. You know what I mean? Human beings are complex creatures, and we have many, many reasons, not just one simple reason. Yeah. Not you shouting at them to be like, hey, stop it. Yeah. Boop their head, right? Yeah. Like, boop. That's not it. It's much more complicated than that. And it's as a matter of fact,
if you try to do that, they're going to be like, screw you.
Exactly.
You don't know nothing about me.
Exactly. And then they're going to boop back. You know what I mean? Like, you need to, it's a long-term battle, but it's a battle worth fighting.
Absolutely.
It's a battle worth fighting. If you're able to, like, for example, we'll talk about something as simple as recycling. Yeah. If everyone was just aware of recycling, right? And they just like actively practice it and actively just like, slap their child's hand when they drop like a wrapper on the floor or whatever. It's just like, hey, stop that, right? And they're like, why? Why are you being so anal about that? I'd be like, oh no, it's this is what it does? Yeah. Being more cognizant about what kind of material you use. Hey, instead of using shopping bags, let's use totes instead, right? Yeah, it's a lot harder, but if we practice it, you know what? At the very least, like associate it with a certain kind of like a rewarding outcome, right? Yeah. But if everyone just did that, if we all just focused on our own groups and stuff like that, we would be able to make change. Here's the problem, though. A lot of families, right? Like like just like how, for example, another thing is that, so we're talking about one whole different thing, right? Mm-hmm. But another problem that I feel like a lot of people tend to forget is that ideals, like what America is right now, and I think what the world is right now, is just a battle of ideals every single day, right? Those ideals are just associated with so many things, right? When it comes to like right-leaning people, they're focusing on tradition, they're focusing on family, they're focusing on, ethics, right? Like old school type things, right? Like chivalry and stuff, right? Which is good.
Yeah.
And ideals, this is great. This is good. As Muslims, we lean actually towards that, right? And then we have like the left wingers, right? Which focus more on like rights, more on ideals, individualism, right? Yeah. Now, I see the truth in that too. That's good too. But there has to be a balance in everything. Yeah. And this is where I think that, like, is it a curse? Is it beauty? God knows. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created this world for the way it is, and it was not supposed to be a heaven, right? Yeah. It was supposed to be a test that everything kind of just balances it out, right? Balances itself out somehow, some way. just everything in moderation, understanding, you know, the uniqueness of these conversations, but at the bottom level, just having the respect of the person who's sitting on the table right next to you, in front of you, right?
Yeah.
It's like giving them the decency, not demonizing them. They're a human being too.
Right.
Understanding when you have, like, we were talking about genuine conversations. Why do we enjoy these 3-4 hour long conversations? Yeah. Because we're not only listening to the story. We're listening what made this person who they are. And we love
connect
that.
With it. Right.
Exactly, right? Why can't we do that when it comes to our politics?
Right, exactly. And what was I just about to say? Oh,
but we don't, sorry, I'll cut you off. A lot of people don't want to do that because it's scarier to fight a human than it is to fight a monster.
Exactly. That actually, it's perfect that you said that. What I was going to say was, I don't know if any of you saw recently, do you guys know who Jocko Willink is?
No.
You ever heard of him? Okay, well, he's like an ex-Navy SEAL. He's been on like Joe Rogan a handful of times, but now he's just someone with like, he makes videos. He has like a podcast of his own. He's like a motivational speaker. Yeah, he does. And people love him because he just has a lot of resolve, and you can hear it when he talks. And he has a lot of grit and resolve, and you can hear it. And he was talking about how during World War I, the English and the Germans, they were fighting trench warfare. You know, everybody hates each other, and they really didn't like each other. Maybe you guys have heard of the story on Christmas Eve.
Yep.
On Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
And he said these two got together. The next day, you're shooting at people. You know their names now. You know their names. You just celebrated with them. They played soccer together. Everything changed for a while. If I remember correctly, they made an agreement to not shoot at each other. Yeah.
They had dinner together. They apparently exchanged gifts or whatever. Like they genuinely the armies met up.
Yeah.
And that's
and that just goes to show
but because we're human.
Exactly.
We're human. We're creatures of community. We're creatures of society. We're creatures of being a part of each other. We're a part of this this amazing network that Allah has created. But you know what? What we choose to do, because it's much easier to kill. Like I said, it's much easier to kill a monster than it is to kill a human being. Absolutely. You want to demonize and I've killed figuratively and realistically. You demonize the heck out of the opposition, right? Yeah. Like no tolerance, no nothing. Yeah. You know, one of the things when it comes to the whole no nonsense culture, one of the things I find it very interesting is that you're kind of just making it easy on yourself by saying that I'm not going to deal with these people, because what you're choosing to do is that you're choosing to ignore the fact that there is some ugliness in humans, and it's okay. One of the things that I remember hearing this another quote. And I'm going to butcher it.
You're choosing to ignore also that there's ugliness within you that they see.
Exactly, right? And there's this quote that I remember that's again, I'm going to butcher it. I'm probably going to say it really bad, but it's like the monsters that are under, it's not the monsters in our bed that we should be afraid of. It's the monsters that we create, or all monsters that are under the bed are the ones that we create. And
where's it from?
I don't remember. It was a really nice quote. I wish I can give it justice. I'm not saying it properly, but if we type it up, it'll probably pop up somewhere. Yeah. But it's real. Like all the monsters that we've created are all man-made. Yeah. They're all, I feel like humanity is wishing aliens, please come so we can all get together and fight it. We can all unite under one banner, because we are tired of just demonizing ourselves, because we are now highly educated and sophisticated people that we know what we're doing. We're just in denial. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's what it used to be once upon a time, where you can have civil debates and conversations about things that are extremely stupid to one person versus the other. Yeah. But it's not. It's a lot more complicated than that. Just some people just don't know, and you can't blame them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The Edgar Allan Poe, the scariest monsters are the ones that live within our own souls.
Yeah, I think that's the one that's it. Yeah. But it's so true, man. Yeah. In everything, it's just a theme. It's the bane of our existence. We're our own demise. We're literally killing what gives us life.
So right? We're talking right now about the monsters we create are within ourselves. And you mentioned earlier about how I'm gonna segue into a different part of the conversation, and then maybe like we'll go on for a little bit more, and then we'll probably wrap it up soon.
Awesome.
But something I wanted to talk about is, so before we talked about how it's really hard to look within yourself, as opposed to looking outside to the exterior. So recently I picked up the book I was talking about earlier. That book was scary to read because it was like, well, it was scary to read. It's supposed to be scary to read for everyone, maybe on different levels. But there was this one chapter in particular that talked about very crucial development from age 0 to like 4 or 5, where, and this was written by a psychiatrist, so he knew his stuff basically, and he was like, in these very, very crucial years, a lot of things happen that will shape the rest of your life. And in the book, he basically was like, it's time for you to look in yourself. It's time for you to be honest about what happened during these years, and it's time for you to be honest about, you know, how that shaped the rest of your life. Now, I was looking at that and I was like, holy crap, right? And this was just me reading the book. I can only imagine, like, if I was like talking to a therapist or something, I can only imagine it would have been like to the nth degree. And I think everybody to some degree can look at that and be like, holy crap. Like every single person needs to go through that holy crap moment to learn more about themselves. And maybe the holy crap moment that I went through wasn't enough of a holy, like maybe I still have some more like, or I'll definitely still have a lot more delving to do. But the reason I wanted to bring that up is because it became evident to me that any slip-ups by the parents very, very early on, have major consequences in the child's growth going into the rest of their lives, right? And this never occurred to me. And just recently, you had a baby boy.
Yeah.
And, you know, people always talk about difficulties when it comes to parenting. And I've always known parenting was like, you know, it's a difficult thing, and I've always had that in the back of my head. I mean, I'm sure you could go on a long time about that. And I've always kind of like, yeah, I get it. Parenting's difficult. You have to feed the baby. You wake up, the baby cries, whatever. But now I read this book, and I'm like, if you mess up, down the line, that baby's gonna get screwed up if you're not very, very careful. And so now I'm like, wow, this seems like an impossible task. Because the guy that wrote the book, it was an audio book. I was listening to it, and he was like, here are some things, here are like different situations that breed different types of difficulties for people. And I was looking at these different situations, and I was looking at my own situation, and I think everybody to some degree fits into one of those situations that could have messed them up. Like, parents try really hard. There's a lot of really great parents, but no parent is perfect.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so now I was looking at these categories, and I'm thinking about some of my friends.
Do you remember some of the categories, like what the terms were?
Okay, yeah. So,
like, was it something like detachment theory, avoidance? Something?
Yeah. So I won't talk about like my own too in depth, but let's say like, okay, here's one of the big ones that he wanted to hit on was, and to some degree, I think like everyone can feel this. Talked about this idea of toxic shame, and how within the first couple of years, a baby thinks that it is the center of the universe, and everything that happens to the baby basically is as a result of what the baby is doing. So now if the baby feels neglected or feels any sort of abandonment within those first couple of years, because to a baby, abandonment is essentially like death. Like, it's like the worst thing that could possibly happen, neglect. So now the baby experiences those things, and the baby thinks that it's the baby's fault. So that will cause, now this is again within earlier years, but later on it'll also have repercussions. That will cause within those earlier years acting out to get attention when it doesn't make sense because it's not good attention, but at least they're getting attention now. And so they have this idea of toxic shame, where the way that everyone else feels is due to their own actions, and they are responsible for making people feel, or like the way that people feel around them, they're responsible for that.
Yeah. So there's so much research that's been done and still continues to be done on development, right? Mm-hmm. There's different stages. There's so many different theories. Like I'm not gonna go into them, but yes, early development can shape your entire life, especially if it goes by unnoticed. Yeah. In most cases, it does. Most people, they don't go see a therapist. Mm-hmm. They don't reflect on their behavior, right? Especially as men, right? For a very long time, we were not even challenged when it comes to our emotional state, right? Mm-hmm. And that's recently changed. But for a very long time, we just did whatever the hell we wanted, and women and children kind of had to deal with the consequences of that. Unless, society had good leaders who challenged you and stuff like that, which for a very long time of human history, there wasn't the case, right? Like in Alhamdulillah, in the time of Islam's peak, there was that, right? Where scholarship, taught adab and taught certain kinds of like things that challenged who you were for a better version of yourself, right? That kind of like made up for all the toxicity growing up. But that died out a long time ago. That's still there to a certain extent, but it's not as it's not massively available, unfortunately.
So what do you recommend? So like you challenge yourself, and then you get your holy crap moments, and you recognize that, oh yeah, this has affected me as a kid, and this is why I am who I am. Do you just accept it and roll with it? Or?
Hell no. So what I always recommend to everyone, and I don't, even if you think you're like the most healthiest, well person emotionally, is go see a therapist. Seeing a therapist should be a requirement in this world. Like it should be like a part of like, it's mandatory for you to see a therapist every 6 months. Like it's mandatory, like for regularly, like it's mandatory for you to see your doctor kind of, right? Because therapy is not just like for people who have like major health issues, and our society really pushes that. Like I know people who are like A performers, like everything they do is amazing, but they see therapists. It just like, I remember at a very young age, I was actually exposed to this by two celebrities. I forgot what their names were, but there were a couple that like, I just really thought they were adorable. And I'm weird like that. I'm a huge, like, I'm a hopeless romantic. So when it comes to like couples that win, I'm like, yes.
You can see
exactly. So like I really like, so I saw these, they were on the Ellen show, and they were talking about like, that they're going to couples counseling, and people are like, like, do you have problems? Because you show the world that you're very happy. We're like, we're actually very happy, but we realized that we were only going to benefit from going to therapy because we were just going to add more tools to our toolbox. And that's literally what it is, man. There is nothing wrong with being the 2.0 version of yourself. Why not? Everyone should want to do that. So the first thing of any kind of problem solving is identifying the problem and acknowledging that's a problem. That is already a step. You've already walked the journey.
And I also want to say, like, basically what you were saying is like, even if you're good, there's still like space to get better. But then even the people that are good, like, okay, like as for myself, within myself, like I haven't noticed any like we'll talk about like people like very often will be like, oh, like such and such has like, mommy issues, daddy issues, whatever, right? And it'll be like people will point fingers at people and think that they're totally in the clear themselves of like any issues growing up. And like even myself, like I didn't necessarily like, there were always like, everyone kind of has problems growing up and people face different things, but I never necessarily looked at myself and was like, there's something that needs to be addressed. But when you are exposed to it, you're like, oh, that did need to be addressed.
The thing is that, so that's absolutely true. A lot of people don't think that there's anything wrong with them. Especially, here's the thing. When your negative, toxic emotions are in favor of what society wants you to be. For example, we already just discussed it, but people who always want to help other people, who like want to save the world, in society, that's encouraged. You want to be a part, you want to help and everything like that. But then these people avoid problems that are happening at home. Why that's the case? It's a coping mechanism. It's a way for you to avoid what's happening at home. You know what I mean? You're feeling good about yourself because you're helping other people when your life at home is just a wreck, right? So many people, I can't even count how many people I know that are like that. And half of them don't even know they're like that.
Yeah.
Like, I remember I was with a friend, and, you know, he was making some big moves in his life. I was super proud of him.
Yeah.
And I go home, and he's just shouting at his mom. Yeah. And I was just like, what was that? Yeah. And, like, I didn't want to say anything to him, but I did, because, like, I don't, I'm kind of, like, I don't know my boundaries, unfortunately, sometimes when it comes to these things. Like, I'm like, man, you know, you can't just do that. He was like, oh, no, like, you know, like, that's our relationship, right? But the mother, like, I was chilling with him the whole day. The mother was miserable. She was just, like, quiet, you know, mute, like, just barely spoke, was, like, so, like, you know. And I realized, I was like, they've created a dynamic that works for them. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because but is it healthy? Mm-hmm. No, it's not. Yeah. And it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be worked on. You need to challenge yourself to be better. Yeah. So that's to answer your question. Like, you know, you don't just accept it. Once you know that there's a problem, you got to work on it. And there's tools out there that can help you, right? And that's something that, like, everyone has their thing. You might not be able to identify it, but a professional will be able to. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, it does stem from childhood experiences. Mm-hmm. So it's very little things. No matter how, like, you might not even think it's traumatic at all. For example, you accidentally being locked in a bathroom when it was, you know, and, like, not being able to get out. Yeah. That might shape your entire life, and you might not have no idea.
Things you don't even remember.
Exactly. That's the biggest thing, actually. Most of the stuff that traumatize us as kids, we bury it. Yeah. We don't remember it. Yeah. You know.
So how do you deal with that as a like up and coming parent that your child is like
it's like you have to like care for your
tread. How do you deal with us for so many hours?
This tightrope, and it's
so it's a good question. How am I here with you right now for so many hours? Well, you know, I have a son and I have a wife, right? So I'm not claiming that I'm a guru in parenting at all, right? Like, it's my first child, and Mikhail, who's my son, is very aggressive. Like, he's just an aggressive baby. He scratches everyone. He fights. He bites. He screams. He cries all the time, right? Like, I am not killing the parenting game at all, right? But
I've been messed up with the first.
Yeah, exactly. That's what everyone tells me. They're like, everyone tells me that, right? Like,
he's gonna grow up and this is online. You're gonna grow up.
Was I really like that, Dad? So, but here's the thing, though. I'm aware of it, and I'm aware. Like, I'm actively working on it, right? Mm-hmm. So the thing is that it is definitely draining, and it's definitely harder, and it's definitely, like, you know, unnecessarily harder, right? Like, for example, parents love to put their kids in front of the TV or in front of the phone. Why? Because it shuts them up. Mm-hmm. And, like, you know, like, you don't understand that 15 minutes of silence can literally save you from, like, you know, at some points taking your own life. Like, that's how bad it can get for some parents, right? Just think about it, especially if you're not prepared as a parent, right? Like, it's why is parenting so hard? Parenting is not hard because you're feeding someone and cleaning them. Yeah. Parenting is so hard because, like, in essence, you're now shifting your life ethos, right? Yeah. What your existence is. Yeah. From you to someone else. Person, yeah. You know what I mean? Like, people think that, like, marriage is hard. Children is much harder because marriage, at least your wife, you know, is an able-bodied person. Yeah. If you're not there, they're gonna still survive. You get what I'm saying? And if she's not there, hopefully you will survive too. If you're, you know, a competent man that knows how to do things, right? A lot of people can't, right? But in this world, you'll be fine. Like, in our current society, you'll be fine. But kids, on the other hand, they're not. Yeah. They're gonna die. Yeah. Like, point blank. You leave them for an hour, like you said. Yeah. It will shape the rest of their life. Yeah. You know, so being cognizant of that, educating yourself, being aware, but then also being forgiving. Yeah. Because the thing is that no one is going to, if you're too busy, like, tiptoeing, you're just going to end up becoming a helicopter parent, and you're not going to let your child experience. Like, one thing I do, which a lot of parents don't like that I do, is I let Mikhail fall. Mm-hmm. Like, Mikhail is the most clumsiest baby I've ever seen. This kid has knocked his head so many times, I feel like he's just going to be bad at math just because. And, like, if he doesn't, I'll be like, I'm sorry, man, like,
I messed up once.
Either I could have like hold you every single time, and you were never going to learn, right? And you're just going to be, like, afraid of every little thing. You know, I don't just let him fall down the stairs, you know, like, but at the same time, like, if he falls, like, if he's running, like, for example, this actually happened, right? Like, we were outside, like, on the road, right? We have a parking lot in front of my apartment. And we were just playing outside, and all the aunties are looking at us, like, you know, our neighbors. There were a bunch of like aunties, and, you know, they're like, oh, Mickey is like their nickname that they gave him, and he fell. Like, and he didn't even just fall like flat down. He felt like dramatically, where it was like, just imagine like that background where he was like, like he literally slow motion. He fell on his knees and then he went flat down, right? And I thought it was the most cutest thing. But then the sound I heard after and what I saw after was not cute. It terrified me. My wife's gonna hear about it the first time today on this video.
No.
Is that he started bleeding from his lip, right? I was like, oh, my son is bleeding. And I was freaking out. So I was like, what am I going to do right now? I was like, that is my son. He's going to see how I'm going to react. Even though he's a baby. Yeah. Babies are the one thing that my professor used to say in undergrad was like, babies are the best researchers because they're curious about everything. And they learn about everything. They don't make any unconscious decisions, whatever, right? So if he sees that I react a certain way, he's going to want to do it. And that's what Mikhail does. Mikhail would purposely fall sometimes so he can get attention. No, you gotta have to fight that. So what I did was, while all the aunties ran towards Mikhail, right? I kind of rushed. I didn't run. I rushed. I picked him up. I was laughing at him. Feel like, wow, my brave boy. You know, he's so strong. And then just quickly wiped up his blood so my wife would not see it, right? But he's bugging out. But here's the thing. If I was like, oh, he would have continued to cry for an hour. He only cried for a minute. Yeah. He cried very loud, but he only cried for a minute. He gets hurt much less, and he cries a lot longer because of the people around him.
Because and the reaction that they have.
Exactly, and they're basing their reaction based off of you. Should I cry? You know, am I gonna get a hug? You know, they determine, you know, how should they react based off of parents too. Yeah. And one thing that someone was telling me, a parent was telling me that they feel the parent's energy. Mm-hmm. Now I'm I tend to be very anxious. I have very bad anxiety problems. So I'm always anxious, right? Yeah. So one of the things I've actually been very terrified about when it comes to being a dad is that, and this is something that I did, one of the questions you were asking me about masculinity and mental health, right? Is that I'm just trying to balance that out. I've been always a very emotional guy. I've been very in tune with my emotions. I've been very honest about my emotions. But at a certain point, I've realized that I've allowed myself to go on a little soft. Being in tune with your emotions does not mean that you should be soft. Yeah. You should be soft-natured, but not to the point where you are being harmed because of it. Yeah. People shouldn't take advantage of you. You shouldn't never allow anyone to take advantage of you, right? And that's what the prophet was. He was a balance of everything. He was soft when he needed to be. He was kind when he was needed to be. He was loving when he was needed to be. Right. But he was stern, confident, brave, right? Things that people think that you can't have both, but you can if you discipline yourself. That is the struggle. Umar radiallahu anhu was one of the harshest sahabas out there, but when he became Amir, he had to learn to be calm, right? Usman radiallahu anhu was one of the most softest people, right? But when he became Khalifa, he had to learn to be confident and brave. It's something that you have to do. Yeah. When I became a parent, I had to be aware of the fact that I tend to be anxious. I tend to freak out. I tend to internally, we were joking around about, how can you hide it so well? I've just learned. I've been living with my entire life. But now it's time for action. Yeah. Now I have a son who's looking at me. He's going to look up to me, right? Yeah. Something I didn't have, right? Yeah. And it's my responsibility that's something greater than me, right? To be able to provide that for him. Yeah. I can choose to let myself go and just, freak out, right? Which most parents do. Yeah. Or I can either take the other extreme, which is I'm going to be so particular. I'm going to read all these hundreds of books and then, just be mindful of every little thing that the child is going to go through, right? And the process, not letting the child live their life, right? Or am I just going to be forgiving? Yes, be cognizant, aware, educate yourself, right? But forgive yourself when you make mistakes. It wasn't your intention. And you shouldn't, beat yourself down about that. That's something that I'm still actively learning. Yeah. Like I said, I'm not acing the parental game, right? Someone sees my kid with me, they will be I don't want to be a parent. And I'm yeah, I feel you. But, but at the same time, I am privileged to have a certain kind of education that people don't have, right? Yeah, that really does help me when it comes to parenting.
And that probably, you having that education probably brings you to a point where even if you are doing like, you know, better than most other parents, you still look at what you're doing and you're like, you're still more critical of yourself, and you're like, oh, I'm not acing the parenting game. Whereas someone who just doesn't have this knowledge, this background, is like, oh, I'm killing it right now.
Exactly. So that's the thing, right? Because now that the fact that I'm aware that I'm not, you know, doing it, I'm not parenting well, right?
All right, we're back. What are we talking about?
We're talking about parents. I would say that having like the education does not necessarily mean that you're going to be a good parent. Like, I definitely struggle being a parent. I was not prepared to be a parent. Every day is still a challenge for me. And I think that that's okay. I think that's completely fine as long as you're willing to grow and learn and, you know, be honest about it and not just lie to yourself and tell yourself that you're doing a great job and, you know, like things are not necessarily like moving forward.
And like you're in charge of the growth and development of another person, but you're not by any means done yourself with your own growth and development.
This is actually a very important thing that you mentioned. So a lot of parents, and I think it's so tragic when I hear this from parents, is that they're like, I live my life for my kids. Or like, you know, you see, so this is one thing that I think in particular Desi parents, like immigrant parents, really struggle with, is that they will just beat themselves up like left and right when it comes to everything just so they can see their kids succeed. But what you don't understand, and I hope that our generation of parents change that, is that one of the most healthiest things for a young person to see is life and light in your eyes as adults. And you don't see that in parents. You see them dying and decaying and just like, you know, finding joy through you, which is great. But then this is the problem with that, is that okay, so I'm just thinking about so many things at the same time. One thing I've noticed when it comes to a lot of parents, as human beings, I think a very important thing that happens in everyone's life is when you stop idealizing your parents and you realize they're just humans. There's usually like a point where you just realize that, oh, my parents are capable of doing stupid things, or my parents do not know all the answers.
I don't think it's even parents. It's just that when you realize that everyone has no idea what the hell they're doing. They're just going along.
But that's like a step further, right? One of the first things that happen is that you're just like, oh, and like, you know, that's parents' like worst nightmare, is like when my son is more stronger than I am, or when my son is taller than I am, or when they no longer need me for help with homework, or when they don't need me to drive them anymore, or when they don't need they don't need a hug from me anymore. Like that's like, you know, like that's I can now see, I can only get a taste of how tragic that is, right, for a parent to go through. It's just something that I'm not ready for, right?
When my mom and dad had my oldest sister, I want to say they were maybe not my age, a little bit older. Bro, you put a baby in my hands right now, I have no clue.
Bro, I had no clue either. So like I was there when my son was being delivered, right? And the whole time during the pregnancy, I was freaking out about it. I was like, I'm going to be a terrible dad. I had this whole existential crisis, which I was like, I've never had a father figure. I'm not a sportsy person. I don't want my son to be like an indoor weeb like I am. Like, I would like for him to be a weeb, but I'd like for him to be a healthy weeb. You know, like I would not want him to, you know, I knew he was a him, so that's what I'm saying he. I'm not saying like if it was a she, same thing. You know, like not differentiating with gender. But I was like, I really wanted my son I wanted to give my son the best I could, and I realized I wasn't the best. I was terrified. I didn't feel comfortable holding newborns. I was just like, you know, like I just wasn't ready for this. And you know, I was really thinking about how am I going to behave when, you know, I'm seeing my wife in labor, because like I've heard all these horror stories of what men do, right? People faint and all that. I know people who fainted. So I was like, oh my God, how am I going to handle this? And when you're in that moment, you don't think about yourself. You're just like in the moment, you're just experiencing it. And I remember when my son was there with the nurses that were cleaning him up, and the doctor was, you know, like taking care of my wife, and the son and the nurse, I could hear him crying, and you know, there's blood everywhere. Obviously, there's a lot of things that would like just freak me out in general, but I just zoned that out, right? All I heard was like my son crying, and then the next thing I hear, which I wasn't anticipating, was like, Dad, why don't you go hold your son? And I just realized he's talking to me. He's calling me dad. Like, I'm a dad. You know what I mean? And I've never, and you know, with my weird relationship with my dad, right? Because I haven't had a healthy relationship with my father for a very long time. I recently started developing some kind of conversation with him now, which has been very difficult to do. But, you know, like with that and everything else, and me not being the stereotypical man, right? Not being macho, whatever, or dependable, which is a big thing for me. I was all over the place. And life didn't give me a choice. Like, the nurses just came and they plopped them on me. Yeah. And I was just like, okay, that's that, right? Like,
let's do this. Let's go.
Yeah, like I was exactly right. Like I was like, hey, Mikhail, you're my son and I'm your dad. You know, like
it's nice firm handshake.
Yeah, I was literally like, I'm sorry, this is what you get. Like, you know, these are your cards, but I hope that you enjoy them, right? Like, and that's something that was just like every day I questioned myself. Is he enjoying those cards? Is he happy with? Is he proud with? You know, and to a certain point, I think about that with my wife too. I think about that with my siblings too. Am I what they need? Am I what they want? Am I what, you know, like, and I push myself to that standard all the time. So yeah, I wasn't ready at all. Yeah. It just like happened, and I had to, you know, like some guys, they do get overwhelmed. They run. Women too. There's been many cases where after the birth happens, just the parents were just like, I can't do it, because it's you don't understand. It's like
it becomes so real.
It becomes so real, and it's a long-term battle. It just doesn't stop. Yeah. You know, it's the rest of your life, and it's about someone else. So that's what we're talking about. When parents, like they make the children.
They get like a new draft pick, and it's like the day before the season starts. They're like, oh, I guess we're doing this now.
That's what it feels exactly. Like. It does, but it doesn't stop.
It's like oh. Yeah. Yeah.
But it doesn't stop. It keeps going. All the bad and good, you're stuck with it, right? Yeah. So parents, they tend to sacrifice their goals, their dreams, their accomplishments, right? In Clanad, what did Nagisa's parents did? And in Clanad, Nagisa, who is the female protagonist, she had health issues, and her parents were high, like A-level celebrities, like actors, and they were doing very well, and their child almost died and they weren't there. So they had this whole thing where they're like, you know what, we're going to sacrifice everything. So they were making good money and everything. They sacrificed that. They opened up a family bakery. The wife, like the mother, sucks at making food, but the whole neighborhood like pretends to like it, which is such a cute thing. Like every time the father kind of slips out, she runs and starts crying, and he like stuffs his face with bread. He's like, I love them, and he runs after her, right? Which I find to be the most cutest thing ever, and I've strived to be like that with my wife. And what they do is that, you know, she's a tutor, you know, from time to time, and Nagisa she finds out, because she's trying to be an actor for a drama club, and she finds out that her parents sacrificed their dreams. And it has this whole like thing where, to the point where she gets sick again. And, you know, they're like, you know, like what parent would not want to do that for their children? You know what I mean? Like, and that's something that I absolutely love with parents. However, at the same time, Nagisa's parents found joy in that. They didn't just stop, right? They continued to be who they were. Yeah. They lived their lives. Some parents, or actually most immigrant parents, they sacrifice their entire being, their joy, their relationship with their spouse, with everything, just to make sure that their child is okay. What happens when your child leaves? You're gonna, you know, like, does your life stop?
You know, with so this is like getting a little bit personal, but so recently my dad, you know, like everyone has differences with their parents. You know, I've always had like some differences with my dad, but you know, he's like, we've had a really beautiful relationship, I would say, where he just kind of like, it's like a man-to-man relationship, and I feel like I've reached that age, and I feel like at some point people reach that age where they can almost like kind of talk to their parents like they're their peers, and like it's really beautiful that I'm at that point where like my dad kind of talks to me like his friend. Like, dude, recently, like I just hold on, let me finish this point, and then recently I like bought my dad food. I never did that before. Like I bought, like, we went to some place.
You bought him something.
I bought him food, and we went to some place, and I pull out my card. He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Dad, don't worry about it. It's on me." Oh, he's like, "What the hell are you talking about?" I'm like, "Dad, just let me get the food." and we like fought, and I've never had that little like who's paying for this fight with my dad before, and it was a great thing. But the point I wanted to get at before was I was on the phone with him recently, and my whole life he's worked really hard, really hard, worked his butt off to this day. Like, I'm talking long weeks for his kids, for his family, and he did that so that we would, of course, like, nobody has like a struggle-less life.
Yeah.
But he worked really hard because he wanted to minimize the struggles we had. So recently, like, as I'm here right now, sometimes my dad calls me and he's like, I want you to be back home. Like, why are you going off and working and trying to pay rent when you could just come here? And I'm like, Dad, I love you. I'm grateful for everything you did for me. But can you just give me the justice of having my own struggle?
Yeah.
Can you just allow that? Because throughout my whole life, what my dad thought was best for me, and I don't hold this against him. Like, at the end of the day, he did what he thought was best for his kids, and that involved reducing struggle down to a minimum.
Yeah.
And like you said before, a child needs to see the struggle that their parents go through, kind of, and not run away from it, but rather want to experience it themselves.
Yeah. Another actually, you wanted to say something.
No, I was gonna say, like, I was gonna ask you a question. Like, do you think it's important for parents to be almost like friends with their children, right? So like, growing up, like, I'm sure this is common for a lot of us and a lot of people out there, but like, I always saw like my dad as like the authority figure in the household. Like, he'd always be like, if I wanted something, I'd ask my mom, and if my mom was nice, she'd let me have it, but then if she was mad at me, she's like, go ask your dad. Like, you'd have that dynamic, right? Like, he's like the boss, and you don't want to piss him off, and you want to, like, make everything good. But like, I don't blame them, because again, like, I think one of the biggest things I've come to terms with is, like, I've had a rocky relationship with like a lot of people, not even just my parents, like a lot of people. But then what I said before, like, you realize that no one knows what the hell they're doing, so you can't really blame them for the way they're acting. It's just that they're all winging it along as they go. So specifically for my parents, like, I always used to say that I'm always gonna be like, I'm gonna be my child's best friend, like, no matter what. Like, I'm gonna make sure
you're compensating for things that you didn't have.
Yeah, but like, I want to ask you, like, do you think that's reasonable, or like?
I don't. And I recently, I for a very long time, I actually believed that was good, that you should be a friend.
Yeah.
But your children will have their friends. They need parents. Yeah. They need parents, but what does it mean to be a parent? That's something that everyone has to decide. So a parent is not someone who demands respect. That is not a parent. A parent is someone who leads. A parent is someone who's there. A parent is someone who shows you how to be vulnerable, how to be strong, how to be brave. And how do they do it? With their own actions, and then to talk to you. A parent is there who listens. A parent is not someone who's there who, yes, challenges you, but not abuses you. And I'm not even talking about beating up. I'm talking about abusing you in the sense as, like, not listening to you. A parent knows when you're in pain, and, knows when it's the right time to interject, to say, to give you words of encouragement, right? And that's something that not every parent can do. You don't need your parents to be your friends. You need your parents to be a parent, a good parent, right? Because you will have your friends, right? But if your parents are someone who's going to be on your equal or below, they're not doing their job. You know what I mean? You can definitely have conversations where you're, in some sense, you're peers to them, right? Because you're growing up, and it's good. It's a proud moment. The day, I can only imagine how that felt for your dad, right? It was definitely in one way scary, but then another way it probably felt good. He was like, I'm at that point now, right? And it's good. But he wouldn't feel that if he wasn't your parent. Yeah. Like, if he was your friend, he wouldn't have felt that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, children are a amana to parents, right? Like, it's like a loan, kind of, like, where, like, you really got to take care of this thing. It's not just a gift; it goes back. So when you give something back, you should give it back in a better condition, right? And that is something that every parent should strive for. However, there's a lot of extremes, right? It's like, how do you really go about it? It's easier said than done, yes, but it's a battle that every parent needs to choose to fight every single day of their lives. And, we only pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at least makes us remotely as successful as, how He wishes for us, right? But when it comes to, I lost my train of thought. I was going to say something. I forgot what it was. But basically, yeah, I don't think that it's a good idea for children to have their parents as friends.
It's interesting because the book that I'm reading or read, the book mentions how a lot of developmental disorders happen because the parents, or usually one parent, is extremely close to the child. And I guess that's something that people may fall into when approaching parenting with the idea of, with the mindset of let me be their best friend, is like one parent sometimes becomes like an emotional center for the kid.
Yeah, because the problem is that our parents, especially in an immigrant community, they have a certain belief of what it means to be a parent. It's like, I need to be strict. I can't be, lovey-dovey with my child. I can't show emotion because that's a sign of weakness. But then you don't understand is that your children, subconsciously, you're learning that. You know what I mean? And you're going to either choose one to like completely actively avoid it. Like, so for example, you'll notice a lot of parents who live in poverty, when the children who live in poverty, when they grow up and they make money, they spoil their kids rotten because like, I don't want you to go through what I went through. But you became who you are because of what you went through. You know what I mean? But there's just, you shouldn't, no one would want any harm on their children. I'm not saying to put your children in harm's way. Like, the last thing I'm going to do is for character development, leave my child in that madrasa I went to, or put them in a bad schooling environment or whatever, right? That's the last thing I'm going to do. However, I want to challenge my child. I want to put them, and that's something a friend cannot do. You know what I mean? Because what's going to happen is that you're going to be the bad guy for probably more than half their lives. You're going to be their bad guy. But, what are you? Are you the, like, what is Batman Dark Knight's like saying? Is like, he's not the hero that we want, need, right? That's exactly what parents are. You know what I mean? You're not going to appreciate everything that your parents did for you until you, one, grow up and see it for yourself as an adult. But then also when you become a parent yourself, right? Because you understand the challenges. Now, at the same time, that doesn't mean that they didn't make mistakes. And those mistakes, they should also hold accountable. And that's another thing. I love my mom, and I do love my dad too. But the last thing I ever want to do is to make them feel like, oh, I forgive you for all the mistakes you've done. I understand why you did them. I understand what you did, what you needed to do. But I don't think it justified it. You know what I mean? And I'm going to hold you to that. And as your son, like, I'm not going to treat you any differently. The last thing I want to do is disrespect you. But I'm going to make sure that I just don't do that to my kids. Because we should be better every single... There's a lot of studies when it comes to this, the generational trauma, right? Which is that like the dumbed down version of it is like, one of our ancestors a long time ago dealt with some kind of traumatic experience, and they just never coped with it properly. And then they taught their kids that, and now a whole society think it's normal, right? Like, for example, in Desi culture, why is it normal to see a woman crying when they get married, right? Like, it's just like expected. Why? You know what I mean? Like, they're like, sad down. You should be having a great time. This is a joyous moment, right? Why is it that, there's so many things.
I've seen people actually put a...
Yeah, they fake it because it's like, because they're happy, but they don't want to show it. Yeah. No, like, we have some practices in our culture, and any culture I think can really relate to it, right? It's literally trauma that's just being reinforced, right? It's become embedded in how we behave as parents, children, whatever.
Or it goes the opposite way, where like, for example, you'll see something and then you'll emulate that behavior, or you'll be like, oh, that's bad, so I'm going to do the opposite.
The exact opposite. You go the extreme. Like I was saying, like when it comes to people who live privileged lives and didn't. Like, you'll notice a lot of basketball players, like a lot of athletes in general, when they get money, they don't know what to do with it because it's just when you have something, if you don't have the tools to handle it, you're not going to handle it very well. It's normal. But, like, what the responsibility of our generation of people who are going to be parents or who are parents is to educate yourself, be aware of your shortcomings, just be like, without all the technical stuff, right? Just be who you wanted to be as a child. Like what you wanted your parents to be, just be that while understanding why your parents did what they did. That's also important. Because if you just choose, I'm gonna be everything my parents were not. You're gonna also just become another evil. You know what I mean? Like you're not gonna solve the problem. Everything in balance, everything in moderation.
The writer of the book, he said the opposite of crazy is crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Crazy is crazy.
It's and that's something that like when people say that, oh, I didn't live a traumatic lifestyle or whatever, or I didn't do this or whatever like that. But then I look at like they're like terrified to tell their parents where they are. Like they will lie to their parents or whatever, or like they were just like, we don't just do that. We don't do that with my dad. Like why not? Like no, we just don't do that. It's just like a given. Now here's another thing. There isn't one way to be a parent, right? Every dynamic is different. Like I'll just be honest about mine. It's probably I'm probably like putting myself out there by doing this, but my wife and my dynamic is like very weird. Like it's very different compared to stereotypical. I'm not the alpha male that runs the family, right? Like I work together with my wife to get things done. And in some cases, like in most cases, 99% of the time, my wife is much scarier than I am as a person. And I'm very comfortable with that. People are like, she wears the pants in the house. I'm like, so what? You know what I mean? Like, what's wrong? But that's not necessarily true. But I get why people assume that. Because, as a man, stereotypically, you're supposed to be, demanding respect. You're supposed to be whatever, right? No. You're not supposed to be demanding respect. You need to earn it. You know what I mean? How do you earn it? Be a person that's deserving of respect. Be a person that's deserving of love. Being a person that's deserving of honor. You know what I mean? Like be a person that your children will be proud to talk about. Not someone who's going to And I'm not saying that you have to do like amazing things. Just work on yourself. Well, I've looked at like some parents. So I look at like some of my friends, right? And how much some of them are doing so well as people. And then some people are just really struggling. And I'm weird like this. I really like to look into like family dynamics and stuff and get into the bottom behind it, right? And I've noticed when it comes to a particular friend of mine, he's so confident who he is, but mashallah, he's so religious at the same time. And I can't explain it, mashallah. He's just like everything that I want to see in a person. And I really looked, I was like, what's different between him and the other people that are really killing the games, but they're not able to balance it properly, and people like who are very struggling in terms of being emotionally well, such as myself, right? And I looked at the parents. The difference when it came to every single one of them was not privilege and all that, right? Privilege was definitely a factor. But both of his parents in particular were still students at the age of 55, 65 years old. These were people that still wanted to grow. They learned with the kids. They grew, they worked on themselves. They had goals, ambitions, desires. Yes, they took the longer road. One person that I like to mention, Sister Susie Ismail. I don't know if you know who she is. She's someone who's like she has an organization called Cornerstone. They focus on refugee like services and a few other services, right? And she's not a therapist, but she's like a communication specialist. So it's not therapy, but it's like, I guess, something similar to that. Now, in the, like Sister Susie Ismail, she recently posted that she just got her PhD. Sister Susie Ismail has written multiple books. She has talked across the world, right? And she has her small nonprofit. But she struggled for 21 years, going through so many different things in her life that she's explained in her posts. You can like check them out. You'll see it. She writes this whole thing. And so many naysayers from her own advisors to her family to anyone else. And 21 years later, she got her PhD. You know what the world is going to look like? Or what is the world going to look at? The world's not going to look at how long it took her. The world's going to look at she has a PhD. You get what I'm saying? And her kids are going to see that. You know what I mean? They were in, like, just imagine just looking at your parents every day, waking up motivated to go to work, to grow, to develop, right? Isn't that going to want to challenge you to do that? Absolutely. And that's something, that light, that spark, right? Like, imagine if you see your parents have that and you're just like, I want that. It's not anything substantial. It's not a degree. It's not money. It's not fame. It's not a house.
It's just working towards something.
It's just working towards something, being better, growing. Because we stop growing when we die.
Omar radiallahu anhu, when after he had become a Muslim, it took him to memorize Surah Al-Baqarah. It took him 12 years. And when I heard this the first time, the speaker Sheikh Shinawi. I don't know if you're familiar with him. One of my favorite speakers of all time. But
Sheikh Shinawi used to come to Almanal all the time back in the day.
Really?
Like he used to like translate the talks in English back in the day.
He's so well spoken.
Yeah, I watched him. He is.
In English.
Yeah.
But the point to take from the fact that Umar radiallahu anh spent 12 years on Surah Baqarah was he kept at it. Like he went slow, but he kept at it, and he was constantly doing that. And we look at that, and we like you can look at that and be like, oh, it took him 12 years to memorize Surah Baqarah, and at the end of those 12 years, all he had was Surah Baqarah, whereas maybe other people within 2 or 3 years can memorize the entire Quran.
Exactly.
You shouldn't look at it that way.
Yeah.
You should look at it as the end result that he got. You should look at it as he stuck with it for 12 years.
Yeah.
And he did it.
Yeah, he did it.
He did it.
And that's something that, you know what I mean? Like, we don't understand the value of that, right? When we were very results oriented, it's like, I just want it to happen. Yeah. Kids are going to look at your journey. They're going to see you. They're going to see you working hard. They're going to see you want to wake up every day. They're going to want to see, because no matter how much you lie to yourself, right? Kids can see through it. Yeah. If you're like, yeah, we're happy. We're a good, happy family. You know, like no. Like your kids know. They know, they sense the tension, they sense it. They know when their parents are not happy. They know when they're going through fights. They know when these things are happening. Filter it out for sure. But don't pretend like it doesn't exist. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's something that immigrant communities, we really struggle with. We struggle with admitting that I was wrong. Yes, there's problems. It doesn't. You making mistakes does not devalue your accomplishments, and your accomplishments do not hide your mistakes. You know what I mean? Another thing that a lot of people think is like, oh, if I admit I'm wrong, that's it. My kids are not gonna look up to me. Really? If you admit you're wrong, you're teaching them a skill. Be humble. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's something that it's very hard to teach an old dog. But
you're also teaching them that if there's something wrong with them, that's just being a human. That's
exactly.
That doesn't mean that it's the end of the world.
Exactly. And that's and that's something that I just really wish that our parents did a better job doing, but I understand why they didn't. Yeah. But that's where the responsibility falls on our shoulders, right? Because every generation ideally is supposed to grow and be better. Yeah. No one is saying to grow a bunch of pansies who are worried about every little thing and they get offended by every little thing. No, not at all. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is to be true to who you are and to want to grow and be better and to challenge yourself. Yeah. These are basic human things, right? And if you're able to just do that, if you really think about it, these are not amazing feats. These are just normal human things. But if you're able to do it, what are the influences that they'll have? Yeah. They're extraordinary. There's no value I can put on that.
Yeah. So, thank you for all that about
everything.
Yeah, all
everything.
Parenting. I mean,
we've literally
maybe. We'll apply those within a couple of years, inshallah.
Inshallah.
I don't want to say a couple of years. Let's
when you're ready. When Allah
SWT
believes that it's when the best time.
Inshallah. So we'll end on this next topic. So something that we were just talking about is how, like you were talking about, especially in the parenting sense, how the Desi culture and to some degree tradition that. Actually, I don't even want to say that. I want to say just stuff that our parents have carried. Everyone in general, it's caused some difficulty in how they approach our generation, and basically the way that they approach things, in a lot of senses, has just has formed our own battles with psychology, growing up and stuff. So. One of the big things right now that I think young men go through is it's hard to make this distinction between what am I trying to say here?
Young men, are you talking about mental health?
Right. Okay, yeah. So I just blinked there for a second. I'm just probably gonna cut that part out. Yeah. But right, mental health and masculinity. So young men these days, and I've gone through this myself where like so there's a stigma with mental health in general and like approaching or like getting the care that's needed. But specifically, I would say with regards to young men who are going through like depressive tendencies or are in a really dark place or even have some suicidal tendencies, I think that there's like a statistic that's like men make X amount of suicides, or men are like more likely to kill themselves because they just don't have like a proper outlet to look through for their mental health. So as far as like mental health and masculinity, I mentioned before how like the Prophet ﷺ was someone who was like a very masculine man, didn't sacrifice this part of him, this aspect of him, was also very in touch with his emotions. So I guess I kind of wanted to ask you, this is like very open-ended, about like how experiences you've had and cases you've looked at doing your own work with young men, and how young men can approach their own mental health a little better.
So mental health like definitely impacts different genders, like female and male, like differently, right? But there's many reasons behind it. Like for example, suicide ideation, which is basically the thoughts of having suicide on a long-term basis, but not like actually acting upon it. It's more prevalent in women. But committing suicide, like actually taking your own life, is something that's more prevalent in men. When it comes to depressive tendencies, females are more likely to go through that. When it comes to aggression, right, men are more likely to struggle with that. Substance abuse is something that men are more likely to struggle with, right? The reasons behind it, there's so many reasons, right? Like there's neurological, biological, societal, right? Different reasons why it happens. But when it comes to like, we're just focusing on men here, male, like masculinity as a topic has been something that's been up for debate for a while now. And like, I hate to say, like, I'm sure this is not the answer you're looking for, but I don't know what the answer is when it comes to masculinity, right? I myself like struggle with that because, you know, I didn't have a healthy male role model that was present in my life for a very long time. And when people talk about toxic masculinity, I've experienced that firsthand. And for a while, I hated being a guy because I was like, I'm associated with, you know, like I look like my dad and I look like this, and you know, I hate myself for that. Or, you know, like why are men abusers or whatever, right? Now those were obviously my biases, and I now know as an adult that women also, you know, there's domestic violence and also on the women's side, and you know, there's I basically been more learned, I guess, right, in this topic. But I guess talking about my experiences with mental health as a man and then with people I know, I've noticed that there's two extremes that are like more prevalent more than ever, which is as a response to the current dialogues that are happening when it comes to defining what masculinity is. Either people are too hyper when it comes to masculinity, right? Which is like completely being aware of every little thing and, you know, seeing certain traits as bad, right? Which when there aren't. And then there's the other extreme, which is like as a response to people having the dialogue on masculinity, they're like, oh, you know what, this is all bogus and I'm just going to be gung-ho, like, you know, you know, like armpit scratching, you know, burping male, right? Now, neither of those like ways are correct. Like absolutely not. When it comes to like masculine, first, so there's different conversations we need to have, and I don't want to take too much time because I know we're like ending the time. We're kind of like wrapping it up. But there's obviously first a westernized and then Islamic context of what it means to be masculine, right? And the perfect example is the Prophet, because we look at the prophetic tradition. We look at, you know, his ways of behaving with certain people and stuff like that. Now, yes, in the Islamic dynamic, right, there is like, you know, there's roles that each gender plays, right? Each partner plays. But that's meant to be a guide for sure, right? It's not supposed to be like the end all be all. It's supposed to be a guide. It's a reference point. What do you do with references? You try to use your best to work with them, right? But at a certain point, if you run short, it's okay. It's okay as long as no one's getting hurt. That's at least my opinion, right? Like it's I'm sure a scholar would disagree with me. Yeah. And I'm like, of course, I admit that I'm uneducated in this topic, so I'm willing to learn on that. But when it comes to what we should be focusing more on is like, okay, what are the behaviors that the society is defining as toxic? And really understanding like, okay, is it genuinely toxic or not? So for example, like stubbornness, right? Like men tend to be people who are stubborn. Men tend to be aggressive, right? I watched this video when it comes to positive masculinity versus toxic masculinity. It's how we frame things. When you call something aggression, obviously it comes with a negative connotation to it, right? But why not just reword aggression to I
think like assertiveness.
Assertiveness, right? Being stubborn to being proactive or consistent, right? Mm-hmm. It's not. It's
or convicted.
These things, like it was these kinds of behaviors and ideals that created heroes, that created the economy, right. That created we could have lived without the wars and stuff that happened, as a result. Yeah. But the society, it would be hypocritical for any of us to say that the society we live in could, we're not reaping the benefits of it. Yeah. Right? So what should men do now that we know that, okay, certain behaviors are not encouraged and certain behaviors are? I think that every human being is programmed to behave a certain way. So if your natural tendency is someone to be, you're more aggressive versus someone who's more like compliant and passive, neither is wrong. It's only wrong when you're not able to, when it starts affecting you and people around you negatively, right? I think that if you're an aggressive person, you could definitely use it as your strength and use it to your advantage, right? If you're aware of it. But then, you also have to be aware that, okay, some people are not as aggressive. Yeah. And there's a way to talk to them, which the Prophet understood, right? A lot of people don't do that. They're like, this is who I am, you gotta deal with it. Yeah. When someone tells me that, I automatically know this person's not willing to grow. Because you think you're perfect who you are. No, acknowledge. And this is something I had to do with my wife early on, right? In our relationship was, I had to be open and honest about who I am, what my tendencies are, whether I liked it or not. And it was such a hard thing to do because I am an emotional guy, right? I'm not aggressive. I'm not like, I'm, at least when it comes to other than gaming, right? Like I'm aggressive in certain things. I'm stubborn in certain things, right? But I'm not like, I'm not stubborn or whatever. Like I'm willing to listen or stuff like that. Yeah. But not only that, I'm very self-aware. I'm very critical of myself and stuff like that. I'm not like the guy who's like, I'll pay for everything. You know what I mean? I got my family. You stay back. I'll save you. I don't have the stereotypical broad shoulders that the family can hide behind and feel like I'm safe in this person's arms. I'm a skinny, fat type guy, right? Like unfit guy that who just has a very light voice, is not like does not demand a presence. When I'm in a room, people feel calm. People don't feel like dependable. Like, what, he's gonna make something happen. And like, no, but I will listen to you and I will let your guard down, right? That's my strength. It was very hard for me to get there though, because our culture and our community encourage a certain kind of way. And I've heard from many times from people, it's like, you're not gonna get married. You're not going to this, you're not going to that because of who you are. To a certain extent, I see where they're coming from. Because when push comes to shove, you need to shove. If someone is disrespecting your family, you stand up. You know what I mean? Anyone, wife or husband, it doesn't matter. Husband shouldn't be the only one doing it. As a human being, if someone's disrespecting someone you love, it's your responsibility to stand up for that, right? One thing I like, what I really like is in One Piece, it's an anime, at the beginning of it, you see this guy, his name is Shanks. So Shanks is like this, you don't realize until later that Shanks is actually...
Episode 3 or 4, by the way.
Shanks is like the...
So what people don't realize until way later in the show is that Shanks is actually it's not a spoiler, like it's a known fact of the universe, that he's one of the 4 most strongest pirates in the world. But when he shows up, he's just this skinny guy that's like having a good time with all his friends, laughing, flirting with the bartender, playing with the kids, right? And this thug comes and this thug flirts with the girl. He's like, hey man, we're just having a blast. Let me just grab you a drink. And the guy like bullies him and he lets it happen, right? The guy drops alcohol on him, whatever, and he's just there like laughing. He laughs. Like the guy leaves and there's like this very serious atmosphere and Luffy's looking and Luffy's like, what is he gonna do? And they all just laugh. Yeah. But as soon as this guy touched Luffy and touched the girl, they killed him. They killed him. Because and they're pirates. It's a cartoon, by the way. So like, you know, like, but not as that aggressive. But what happened there? Yeah. This guy had humility, but he also had honor, right? One of the things that I really like about, like, I guess, like, traditionalist people, right, is the whole idea of chivalry, the whole idea of honor, the whole idea of, like, you know, respect and stuff like that. But I feel like the reason why in today's society, especially in the more, like, the East Coast or, like, in the more liberal sense, right, that people just don't like is because of what we've associated those terms with. When it comes to respect, we think of a very, like, you know, overly rude father that's like, I demand respect, you will not speak back to me. That's not respect. That's not respect. That's like total obedience to like a master, right? Your parents are not your police, your parents are not your whatever, right? Like, and that's kind of the same thing applies to like men, is like, you know, ego, pride, right? All these other things. Yes, these are things we should not have. Yeah. These are things but this is another problem that I feel like the conversation when it comes to masculinity, that men, yes, tend to have, it's more prevalent in men, but I think it's because of how society has been designed. But I feel like now in today's world, we're learning that this is something that are not just it's not a gender thing, it's a human thing. Both men and women have it, we just show it in different ways. And we need to work on those things. Pride and honor and respect and dutifulness and grit. These are not gender roles. Right. These are things that men and women should both have. There are roles that men, I believe, as a Muslim, that, yeah, everyone has a role that they play. But do I believe that that's the end-all, be-all? No. Do I believe that, you know what I mean, you have to be like a macho guy to be a good father? Absolutely not. I also don't believe that you have to be a pansy. And that's the exact opposite of a macho guy, right? It was like someone who's like offended by every little thing. Absolutely not. I think that there's a time and place for everything. You need to be aware of your emotions. You need to understand your tendencies, which is like if you're an aggressive if your tendencies go towards the aggression side, right? Or like the sad side or whatever, right? That you're aware of them. You're aware where they come and you're able to properly deal with them.
And so one of the things that you mentioned just now was there's like what's it called? This dichotomy in a sense of like pansyism and like pansyism and what's like the other
like machoism.
Right? So the problem is like. The problem, like you said, is that dichotomy and that it's like somewhere in the middle. But more importantly, so this is also, I keep referencing this book, but it just applies a lot to this conversation.
No, of course.
But what the author of the book said is do whatever you want. Like you can, like maybe some things you do are more like, you know, traditionally masculine. He does encourage, you know, more so like, you know, being traditionally masculine. He's like, you know, that doesn't mean that you can't.
Exactly. So that's what another thing that people think is that if I am this way, I can't be this way.
It's a false dichotomy.
Yeah, that's not true. And you can still be brave and be scared.
Right. And what he said was the difference. He said I want you to change. I want you to change into someone, and basically this new person is still gonna maybe do the same things, but is gonna do them out of sincere comfort in what they're doing and because they choose to do it right. The problem that we have is not the problem that we have like nowadays, like you mentioned, like pansies. The problem with pansies to some degree is maybe that they're pansies, but the deeper problem, as the author in the book kind of describes, is that they're pansies because they think it will please other people, and they think that through being like super sensitive and stuff that they are pleasing other people. He said, no, that's fine. You can be soft. You can be gentle, but do it because you think it's the right thing to do.
Exactly. People behave certain ways because they know that there's a benefit to it, right?
Exactly.
In today's society, it is definitely encouraged to be more on the softer side than to be on the, like on the harder side. But you cannot change who you are, but you can definitely calibrate it, right? Yeah. And that's something that's very important. Like, I feel like trauma and negative experiences and not being able to be aware of your behavior and your emotions and what triggers you is something that really puts a bad taste when it comes to certain emotions and certain ways to behave, right? Yeah. You're justified to be angry when the situation tells you to be angry. Yeah. You shouldn't be like, I'm fine. No, be angry. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, someone just, like, for example,
maybe don't kill someone.
Yeah, don't kill someone, but be angry. Like, there's a lot of cases where, for example, and I don't like using the word pansy or macho, right? I'm just using them for this situation. But let's say we'll call it what it is. Someone who, let's say, is not confident in their ability to be outspoken, right? They don't value their opinion. Yeah. Those tends to be people who are stereotyped as pansies, right? Yeah. People who don't say what they want to say because they just don't value their opinion or they feel like it's not going to be heard, right? Yeah. So, like, what's the best thing to do? Just stay quiet, let it be. So you'll see people, like, for example, they're very timid, people will push them around and stuff like that. No, that's not right. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's obviously an ideal situation. It would be nice if these people don't push you around, but the world has evil people. Right. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to, take your figurative sword and slay the demon? Yeah. Or are you going to just allow that to take over your life? Yeah. But here's the thing. In the process of us trying to either do one or the other, we end up losing ourselves and people around us. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that's where, and it's all like comes into play, right? Mental health, being aware of who you are, and being confident in your heart. All these things come into play because the reality is that if you're not able to do all that, if you're not able to be aware of like who you are, what your tendencies are, and then work on them, you're not going to live your life. You're going to live as a response. You know what I mean? And people don't, at a certain point, people are going to get fed up. Yeah. Like, I don't want to deal with this anymore.
And, it's like, basically if you go on either side of the extreme, sometimes we go on one side of the extreme because, like, for example, you mentioned how, like, culture kind of promotes, like, our culture right now promotes, like, maybe, more soft, gentle people. So some people look at that and they're like, I gotta go the opposite. They try to, be, like, really, really, like, in a put on way. Like, you can tell it's not their personality. It's really put on. It's very surface, like, aggressiveness, confidence. Yeah. And they think that they're doing that and that it shows that they're not controlled by people, but you're still controlled. If you're doing something in direct response to
someone else, you're being controlled. Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you guys know what this red pill community is.
I've heard of it.
Okay, red pill. There's something called MGTOW, men go their own way. Basically, it's a community of people who like maybe had a bad experience with a woman or something, and now they're like, oh, like, screw women, we're going our own way, and we're gonna, like,
incels?
What?
Incels?
Kind of. It's like kind of, they're similar in some ways, but different in others. But they're like, oh, we're gonna focus on ourselves. We're gonna totally, like, we're gonna disregard women, stuff like that.
Bros and they think, before hoes, kind of thing.
Yeah, and like, there's obviously aspects of that which are, like, good, but, like, as an idea, they think that they're freeing themselves from women. But if you're so obsessed with being free from women, you're not freeing yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it? Yeah, like, but like, subhanAllah, that's how a lot of us, like, we compensate for something, right? Yeah. And it all comes down to just how internally sound you are as a person. I feel like one of the main reasons why the Prophet ﷺ was able to do stuff the way that he was able to do was because he had an inner peace that, a lot of us as human beings just strive for our entire lives. Yeah. And you don't necessarily, like, get it, right? It's just something you build as you get older. And that, like, just understanding the inside, because that exposes outside, and your behaviors, your thoughts, your responses, right? That's how you're going to, like, that's going to basically dictate your life. Like, one thing that I remember reading somewhere, it was like, you want to look at people on how they handle their conflicts, like, how do they handle when things get rough? Because basically, no matter, like I forgot what there was, like, an analogy that they used that when you shake a cup or something, like the coffee will spill or something like that. I saw this. Obviously people will look put together all the time, but you want to see them when they're in their worst moments, because that's what's inside comes out.
Yeah, it was why'd you spill coffee? Because coffee was in the cup. Because if coffee wasn't in the cup, maybe I would have spilled water. That I think.
Kind of. It's like no matter how it's easy to be well put together and show how good you are as a person when things are going good.
Yeah.
It's when things are going bad that really counts, right? And that's where the tests come. Yeah. That's where everything we're supposed to put to place is being challenged now. That okay, you're a Muslim or you're a human being, you were supposed to work on these things during your good moments. It's just like, people who learn to fight. War is inevitable. It might eventually happen, but it's we need to be prepared just in case, being mentally the idea of staying away from something that's allowed, but for self-discipline. Fasting, for example, right? It's a big form of that. It's halal to eat food, right? But we choose to do that because we're trying to develop ourselves. Yeah. What happens when you're hungry? You're cranky, you're angry, you're frustrated, a bad side of you comes out. Imagine if you can stay calm in that inconvenient, hurting time, right?
Like a hyperbolic.
Yeah. Then when you're then when you're in the real world, you're outside the hyperbolic chamber. You're performing level 9,000, right?
Yeah.
That's something it's a Dragon Ball Z reference, by the way, for people who don't know. So that's not around. So that's something that I feel like man or woman needs to go through.
Yeah.
When it comes to the discussion of what is masculinity, I think that for Muslims, we should just look into the Sunnah, and we should look into our tradition, and then use as a reference to define that. I'm not educated in this enough to actually give a solid statement, but that's how I'm choosing to live my life, right? I'm choosing to be humble enough to know that I don't know the answer. I'm trying to figure out along the way as I go. And as society changes and our definition of what masculinity and femininity or whatever, right, it is, I just want to be the best version of myself, right? And if that means that I have to go against my nature at times, so be it, for the betterment of, to put myself in the better, like I said, I'm not a very aggressive person. For actually a very long time in my life, if someone made fun of me, I just let it go. I don't hold it. Even now, sometimes, if someone has, for example, if my boss made fun of me, or put a sly, a side comment, I'm not going to confront them because they, there's a power struggle or whatever there, right? But why? You know what I mean? If you're heroic or brave, whatever, you're going to call them out, right? But subhanAllah, if someone messes with my wife, I speak up. I'm a different person, right? Maybe not to the extent that I should. I want to push them, but I don't. But I figuratively push them, right? I speak up. That's not cool. You better watch what you're saying. You know what I mean? There are consequences to your behavior. And I'm going to challenge you on that, right? But that makes me extremely uncomfortable. What's really funny, my wife, we joke around about this all the time, is that I'm the kind of person that if we go to a drive-thru and they get my order wrong, I will take it. Even if they miss an order. I've been in a case, Saad's restaurant in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
I ordered their cheesesteak. I heard it's really good, and it cost $20, I think, or something along those lines, right? They forgot to give me the cheesesteak. I drove 2 hours to get there. I drove back, didn't care. I was like, whatever, it's okay.
Why?
Exactly, right? My wife, when she heard that, she said, why, right? My wife is the kind of person that if she asks for extra sauce and they forget it, she will wait back in line and become an inconvenience to everyone else in the world. But she's like, I want my sauce.
If you pay for the sauce, you can get the sauce.
We don't even pay for it. It's still, we're making a big deal about it, right? But, so we're very polar opposites like that. But the most important thing is we know that about ourselves. We're not in denial, right? And we choose to every day work on it. Because I know that there's a lack in me, and she knows there's a lack in her. We're human beings. We don't have all of our tools. But, I think that the whole gender, conversation, it's irrelevant if you choose not to look at yourself and you're there's some lacking and there's some, too much of something, and I need to work on both, right?
Yeah, for sure. And at the end of the day, working on both and then finding comfort in what you're doing and doing what you do because you think it's the right thing to do. And I think at the end of the day, that's a great way to, masculinity can mean a lot of abstract things, but I think its very essence is having convictions and following those convictions and knowing, who you are and not shying away from that, because if you're shying away from anything that's, you can say that, a man should shy away from his emotions, maybe because that's what you've learned, but it's not so manly at the end of the day to shy away from anything.
Exactly, right? Like the whole idea of like what it means to be manly. Exactly. You know, like you're kind of it's ironic, right? Like that what masculinity apparently, or like what toxic masculinity teaches, right? It kind of just, it goes against it, right? Now there, at the same time, I do want to acknowledge, I feel like I should, because I did talk a lot about how like we should focus on certain things. Toxic masculinity does exist. Like it does exist. There is a problem out there for a very long time. You know, like women have been discriminated against, whether by choice or by systematic, like whatever, like, you know, like it definitely has happened. Like mansplaining is a thing. I see it all the time and I like laugh about it, right? Like the idea that, you know, a guy just explains everything to a woman. They won't do that to another guy, but they do it to women, right? And it comes from the sense that, you know, like I just want to, I used to think, sometimes I think it's cute. Like, and it's weird that I think it's cute, but I think it's cute. It's like this person's trying to impress this person by saying that, you know, like, hey, I know everything. Like, I'm dependable. But at the same time, I know for the person who's listening to it, when they hear it from 5 different guys for the same day, I saw this video that was like a joke. It was basically like someone mansplained a girl, and then another coworker was like, oh my god, that person just mansplained you. Just in case you don't know what mansplaining is, then he explains mansplaining, and then the other guy comes in and explains what he's explaining of mansplaining. It's just so weird, but it's true. Like it does happen, but we just need to be more cognizant of that, and we just need to make sure that, you know, like at the end of the day, we're not being like hypersensitive to certain things, but at the same time, just being like, okay, yeah, this is something that a person doesn't like. It's probably not right to do. You know, why am I doing this? What is my intention behind it, right? One of the things that I like to practice, like be more intentional.
So if I can just comment on that. So there's, I agree that there is, you know, this is a shared space. This world is a shared space, and we should be cognizant of what other people, you know, are feeling and going through. But then there's also a line that you don't want to cross, which is where you sacrifice your own self, and where you sacrifice what you want to do and feel within you,
for sure,
because someone else's feelings might get in
no, for sure. So that's the thing. You want to look at what your intentions are always, right? Like I was about to mention that. One thing I've been actively working on is, what are my intentions when I say something, right? Like if my intentions is to put you down, man or woman, I should shut up. Yeah. Like, why? Why do I want to do that? You know, I really need to look into that.
Could you check on that?
And there's a few other things too, right? Like I don't agree with, I don't like apologists, right? Like I don't like that. I don't like, and I've noticed that there's a lot of that nowadays. Men who become apologists of their gender. Like I'm sorry for being a guy. You know what I mean? It's horrible. And no. We acknowledge that there has been an injustice done on women in our society, yes. But the solution is not to, and I don't think that...
Not to be ashamed of.
Yeah, I don't think that being a man is nothing to be ashamed. I don't think being a man is nothing to be ashamed of. It's what you're born with. It's who you are. You should be proud of it, right? And just because, you know, majority of your group tends to do something does not necessarily mean that all are bad. But then these are the justifications that people use against racism. People that justify, like, to justify racism, right? So it's just like being aware of, like, you just need to act. It's so complicated. Like, I'm not that wise or educated to give a concrete answer here. But I personally think that we're just so focused on the nuances that we tend to forget the bigger picture. And if someone wants equality, they deserve equality. Like, why not? Why are you treated inferior? Let's look into it. Let's work on it, right? Let's acknowledge where we messed up, right? Or what we could do better. But the last thing I'm going to do is put myself down in the process. Yeah. I admit where I make a mistake, but I'm not apologizing for, you know, like who I am or whatever, like, right?
And I think that's where, like, that's where everything has gone. That's where a lot of these criticisms come up, and that's where, like, there's been a lot of pushback against kind of this idea of, like, for example, you mentioned, like, equality. So a lot of guys, for example, let's say, for example, you want to fight for women's rights. That's not inherently a bad thing. Some people have made that like a bad thing, but it's not a bad thing. But if you're fighting for women's rights to gain favor with women, then it's a bad thing. But if you're fighting for women's rights because you think it's the right thing to do,
I think that so all these like isms, right, that are out there, like feminism, for example, or like all these movements and ideals, they make absolute sense. And in ideal's world, if we were living in the ideal world, I think no human being would go against that, which is like, no, I support that. I do not want, we're all empathetic in nature to a certain point, right? We do not want a fellow human being who's a part of our like, species to be hurt. But it's a lot more harder than that, right? It's a lot more difficult. I think that there has to be, and I think it's gonna happen for the rest of our lives. Like, it's just a reality, because you can never be 100% empathetic towards someone, right? It's going to be a continuous tug and pull in terms of like with the ideals, right? And then it's a matter of like, okay, where do we all fit? Surprisingly, majority of the human race falls in the middle. But the voices are only heard at the top two extremes, right? Because that's what brings the ratings and brings the money and brings everything else. And they are actually the ones who speak the loudest for whatever reason, right? I definitely, equality is such a hard, like, it's such a nuanced conversation that is just like, why even, my thing when it comes to like people who are not educators or not people who are not like researching this stuff, stop focusing about, and I think this is where a lot of our activism is going, is that we're focusing about these ideals and we're fighting about it. And because we're fighting for ideals, we don't want anything less, right? And just focus on yourself. Focus on yourself. What can you do? What can you prevent yourself from doing, right? Maybe I do mansplain a lot, for example, right? Maybe I do spend too much time like explaining everything to someone and someone doesn't like it. Okay. But know that I didn't mean any ill will by doing that, right? And if a woman explains everything to me, and if I didn't like it, if she continues to do it, same thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's gonna be the same thing. But if I think that I'm superior than a woman, then I have another thing coming. You know what I mean? Like, which there are a lot of, I think, men, but now in current day, there's a lot of women too who feel that way, that we just are superior than the other thing. And what, like, we were talking about compensation, right? Like compensating for something.
It's over.
That's what a lot of people do. Like trauma, like, it's such a weird thing. Sorry, I just giggled. Isn't that weird? Like, I love talking about these things. I get weird about it. Like, I can't believe I giggled on camera.
You're like nerding out a little bit.
Yeah, so like,
you learn all this stuff.
Yeah, and not even learn, but like I see it and experience it. Even if I'm not learned in it, I know that this is something that, like, I wish we talked about more in a more safer environment, right? And I know that just the fact that we're talking about it, we're definitely going to get backlash. And I'm completely fine with backlash. But my intentions are, alhamdulillah, I know that my intentions are just learning and educating, right? And I wish that that's what everyone understood, that it's every single thing, every ideal that you're trying to fight for, right? Actually, I wanted to mention Legend of Korra before, but I think that now's an appropriate time to mention Legend of Korra. So for those of you, like, have both of you seen Legend of Korra?
I haven't seen it, but I heard of it.
So Legend of Korra, each villain has an ideal that they fight for. Equality, freedom, and I forgot what the other one was. And
the spirit guy.
I forgot what the spirit guy was, right? But they went to extremes. Like, in essence, their fights were not wrong. You know what I mean? Like, all of them wanted good things for their society. But how they went about it was horrible. They took it too far. And that's something that, you know what I mean, like, needs to be addressed. The battle that's going on right now in our country and in the world is a battle of ideals. You know what I mean? Which is beautiful that we're at that point as a society. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that the world is imperfect. It wasn't meant to be heaven. So you're never going to get it right. Why? Because we're in nature, we're flawed as human beings. We're flawed. We're not angels. We can't just do something absolutely the way it is and just be okay with it. So I find comfort in that. Knowing that we are the best we've ever been as a civilization to a certain extent when it comes to some things. And we're really lacking when it comes to other things. But we're human beings, so that's okay.
Yeah, and we can just be good enough sometimes.
Exactly.
I think
basically at the end of the day, if people should just focus most on being a good human being, focus on the humanity aspects of things.
I think one of the big central messages of this whole podcast was focus on yourself. Like you can't do much for everyone, but you live your world. You see your world through your eyes. You can change circumstances for yourself. You
will make the change you want to see in the world.
Absolutely.
If you make that change in yourself.
Absolutely. Yep. So I think that would be a good note to like end the podcast on. And this was like a very fruitful conversation.
Definitely.
And we really enjoyed having you on the podcast. This was
glad I'm here.
This was like an immense amount of fun. I don't know about you guys, but I like genuinely
had a great time too.
Enjoyed myself.
Definitely.
And it's gonna be a long one, but we're gonna split it up. Yeah. We're gonna cut it up into different parts, and yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, definitely.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, what else do we have to say?
We'll get all the episodes out. Make sure to follow us on our socials and everything, right? And yeah, next week we'll be back with another episode. Hope you guys enjoyed.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.